Some places hold on to things they were never meant to keep. Steptoe Butte stands alone in the southeastern corner of Washington state, a quartzite island surrounded by an ocean of rolling wheat. The Palouse Hills stretch in every direction, golden in summer, pale green in spring, and bone white under winter snow. But the butte belongs to a different time entirely. Geologists classify it as a monadnock, an erosional remnant of the Precambrian era, meaning the rock beneath its surface predates most life on Earth by hundreds of millions of years. The farmland around it formed from wind-blown loess deposited during the last ice age. The butte refused to be buried. The Palouse people called it Eotiacawatin, which translates roughly to the land rising up. European settlers renamed it after Colonel Edward Steptoe, a cavalry officer who retreated across this landscape in 1858 during a failed military campaign against a coalition of tribes. The colonel survived. Many of his men did not. The butte watched it all. Today, Steptoe Butte State Park draws photographers and tourists who come for the panoramic views. On clear days, 4 states are visible from the summit. The road to the top spirals 3.5 miles around the butte's flanks, a narrow ribbon of asphalt that closes in winter when ice makes the curves too dangerous. The park itself is small, just over 150 acres, and lightly staffed. Rangers describe it as peaceful, predictable, and unremarkable. But the files tell a different story. In the spring of 1987, a geodetic survey team from the United States Geological Survey arrived at Steptoe Butte to update elevation benchmarks as part of a regional mapping project. The team consisted of 4 members: project lead Harold Mickelson, surveyor Patricia Okonkwo, equipment technician David Thorson, and field assistant Janet Begay. They expected routine work, 3 days at most. On the second day, Thorson reported that his theodolite was returning inconsistent readings near the summit. The instrument measured angles with extreme precision, yet the numbers fluctuated by fractions of a degree each time he repositioned the tripod. He recalibrated twice. The problem persisted. Okonkwo noted something stranger in her field journal. The soil temperature at the summit, measured with a standard probe, read 15 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than the ambient air. She recorded the figure, assumed equipment error, and continued working. When she checked again 2 hours later, the reading was identical. The team completed their survey and returned to their regional office in Spokane. Their report contained a brief notation about anomalous thermal readings and a recommendation for follow-up study. No follow-up was scheduled. What none of them mentioned in official documents, but what each described separately in personal correspondence years later, was the symbol. Harold Mickelson discovered it first while reviewing field sketches. In the margin of his notebook, he had drawn a small mark, 3 concentric circles, with a single vertical line bisecting them. He had no memory of drawing it. When he mentioned this to Okonkwo during a phone call in 1992, she went silent. She had the same symbol in her notes. So did Thorson. Janet Begay had left the survey shortly after the Steptoe project and could not be reached. 11 years later, in 1998, a second team visited the butte. This group came from Washington State University's Geology Department, conducting soil composition analysis for an undergraduate research program. The team leader was Dr. Franklin Oduya, an associate professor known for his methodical approach to fieldwork. He brought 3 graduate students, Michael Reinhold, Sandra Yazzie, and Thomas Lindquist. Their experience mirrored the first team's almost exactly. Lindquist's magnetometer registered fluctuations he initially attributed to mineral deposits in the quartzite. But the readings didn't correlate with known iron content in the rock. They seemed to pulse regular intervals of 12 seconds, like a heartbeat. Yazzie measured soil temperatures at multiple points across the summit. Her findings matched Patricia Okonkwo's from 11 years earlier, 15 degrees warmer than the air, consistent across all measurement sites. She described the warmth as uncomfortable, like standing over a heating vent that shouldn't exist. Dr. Oduya later told a colleague that he felt watched during the entire visit. He dismissed it as fatigue. He did not mention the symbol he found in his field notes until 2008, when a journalist researching Palouse folklore contacted him. By then, he had left academia. "I drew something I don't remember drawing," he said in a recorded interview. 3 circles, 1 line through them. I'm not an artist. I don't doodle, and I've never seen that shape anywhere else in my life. The journalist asked if he had compared notes with the 1987 team. Dr. Oduya paused for a long moment before answering. "I didn't know about them until you told me." The third and final documented survey occurred in 2003. A private environmental consulting firm, contracted by Whitman County to assess erosion patterns, sent a 2-person team to Steptoe Butte in early September. Their names were Rachel Vieira and James Proudfoot. Both were experienced field scientists with over a decade of work between them. Neither had heard of the previous survey's anomalies. Vieira's report, filed on September 19, 2003, noted equipment interference of unknown origin and soil thermal inconsistencies. She recommended the county consult with the USGS before proceeding with any development near the summit. The county did not follow up. What the report did not include was Proudfoot's account of the afternoon they spent at the summit. In a letter to his sister, written 3 weeks after the survey and never sent, Proudfoot described a sensation he struggled to articulate. "The ground felt aware," he wrote. "Not alive, aware, like it was taking note of us. I kept looking over my shoulder expecting to see someone, but we were alone up there. We were completely alone." He also described finding a sketch in Rachel Vieira's field notebook while she was taking photographs. 3 concentric circles, a single vertical line through the center. When he asked her about it later, she said she didn't remember drawing anything. Proudfoot kept the letter in a desk drawer. He resigned from the consulting firm in 2004, citing personal reasons. He has not returned to Steptoe Butte. In 2004, the Washington Department of Natural Resources amended its classification of Steptoe Butte State Park. A single line was added to internal documentation, designating the summit as geologically sensitive, restricted research access. No public announcement accompanied the change. No explanation appeared in the record. Requests filed under the state's Public Records Act have produced limited results. A 2011 inquiry by a Spokane-based journalist returned 17 pages of heavily redacted correspondence between the DNR and an unidentified federal agency. The subject line of each email was blacked out. The only legible phrase, repeated across multiple documents, read, "Thermal baseline exceedance." The USGS has no record of recommending the reclassification. The Washington State University Geology Department states that its 1998 survey data was archived and subsequently lost during a database migration. The private consulting firm that employed Vieira and Proudfoot dissolved in 2009. Its records were not preserved. The Palouse people, whose ancestors named the butte centuries before European contact, have largely declined to comment on the surveys or the reclassification. One elder, speaking anonymously to a podcaster in 2017, offered only this: "That place remembers things. It's been remembering longer than we've been here. Some ground isn't meant to be measured." A geophysicist at the University of Washington, Dr. Ingrid Halverson, reviewed the available survey data in 2019 as part of an unrelated research project. She found the thermal anomalies puzzling, but not impossible. Deep geological fractures could theoretically channel heat from the Earth's interior. What she could not explain was the consistency. 15 degrees, she said. 3 different teams, 3 different decades, 3 different instruments. The same number. That's not a coincidence. That's a signature. She did not elaborate on what she meant by signature. Her research shifted focus shortly. Afterward. Steptoe Butte remains open to visitors. The road still spirals to the summit. Tourists still photograph the view, marveling at how the wheat fields ripple like water in the wind. But certain details persist in the margins. Rangers report that compasses behave erratically near the summit, though no official advisory has been issued. Photographers occasionally note that their timestamps glitch, images showing times minutes before or after they were taken. A hiker in 2021 posted on a regional forum that she felt pulled toward the summit's edge, though nothing physically moved her. And every few years, someone finds a symbol in their notebook. 3 circles, 1 line, no memory of drawing it. The soil beneath Steptoe Butte is 400 million years old. It was ancient before the first fish crawled onto land. It watched the ice ages come and go. It watched the Palouse people name it. It watched the cavalry retreat across its shadow. Perhaps it is still watching. Perhaps it is still taking notes. The waterfall speaks at a frequency the human ear was never meant to hear. Palouse Falls drops nearly 200 feet into a circular plunge pool carved from ancient basalt, a remnant of the cataclysmic Missoula floods that reshaped this landscape 15,000 years ago. The falls sit in a narrow canyon in Franklin County, Washington, surrounded by scabland terrain, channeled basalt, dry coulees, and wind-scoured plateaus that stretch for miles in every direction. The nearest town, Washtenaw, has a population of fewer than 300. The nearest hospital is over an hour away. The state designated Palouse Falls as Washington's official waterfall in 2014, a recognition of its stark beauty and geological significance. But long before the designation, the place held a different kind of reputation. The Palouse people, who have lived in this region for thousands of years, called the falls by a name that roughly translates to the place where the river falls down. But elders speak of another name, older and less commonly shared, that refers to a sound, a low, persistent tone that could be felt more than heard. Early European settlers wrote of visitors who became inexplicably anxious near the canyon rim. A 1912 hiking guide noted that horses refused to approach within a quarter mile of the overlook. The guide offered no explanation. The falls themselves are fed by the Palouse River, which drains over 4,000 square miles of farmland before narrowing into the canyon. Water volume fluctuates seasonally, heaviest in spring, reduced to a trickle by late summer. The sound of the cascade varies accordingly, or at least it should. In the spring of 1994, Dr. Margaret Kowalczyk arrived at Palouse Falls with 3 graduate students and a trunk full of recording equipment. She was an associate professor of acoustics at the University of Idaho, specializing in environmental sound mapping. Her project was straightforward: document the acoustic signature of the falls at various water levels to study how natural soundscapes affect human perception of wilderness spaces. The team set up recording stations at 4 points around the canyon, 2 at the overlook, 1 near the base accessed by a steep trail, and 1 at a distance of half a mile upstream. Over 6 days, they captured hundreds of hours of audio. The initial findings were unremarkable. The falls produced a broad-spectrum roar typical of large waterfalls, with dominant frequencies in the mid-range. But when Kowalczyk ran spectral analysis on the recordings, she found something unexpected. Beneath the audible roar, buried in the infrasonic range, was a consistent tone at exactly 19 hertz. It appeared in every recording, at every location, regardless of distance from the falls. It did not fluctuate with water volume. It did not fade at the half-mile station. It was constant, precise, and, according to Kowalczyk's calculations, impossible. 19 Hz sits just below the threshold of human hearing. It is also the resonant frequency most closely associated with physiological effects in humans, feelings of unease, pressure in the chest, and in some studies, peripheral visual disturbances that subjects interpret as ghostly presences. Researchers have theorized that infrasound at this frequency may explain reports of hauntings in old buildings with faulty ventilation systems. But waterfalls do not produce stable tones. They produce noise, chaotic, broadband sound generated by turbulent water. A 19 Hz tone would require a resonating chamber of specific dimensions or a mechanical source. Palouse Falls has neither. Kowalczyk documented her findings in a draft paper titled Anomalous Infrasonic Signature at Palouse Falls, Washington. The paper was never published. Two of Kowalczyk's graduate students, Derek Hjelmstad and Yolanda Mbeki, later described their time at the falls in interviews conducted by an independent journalist in 2016. Hjelmstad recalled a persistent sense of discomfort that he initially attributed to the canyon's isolation. It felt like being watched, he said, not by a person, by the place itself. I kept looking over my shoulder, but there was never anything there, just the canyon walls. He also reported difficulty sleeping during the 6-day study, despite being housed in a motel 30 miles from the falls. Each night he woke at approximately the same time, between 3 and 3:30 in the morning, with the sensation of pressure against his eardrums. Like descending in an airplane, he said, except we were at ground level. Mbeki's account was more specific. On the 4th day of recording, she was alone at the base station near the plunge pool when she experienced what she described as a visual stutter. The mist from the falls appeared to freeze momentarily, then resume. She checked her watch. 12 minutes had passed, though she had no memory of them. I don't believe in lost time, she said during the interview. I'm a scientist, but I can't account for those 12 minutes. I wasn't asleep. I wasn't unconscious. I was just somewhere else. When she mentioned the experience to Dr. Kowalczyk that evening, the professor nodded slowly but did not respond. Mbeki later learned that Kowalczyk had experienced something similar the previous day. A third team member, whose name has been withheld at his request, provided a written statement to the journalist. He described finding Kowalczyk standing motionless at the canyon rim on the final morning of the study, staring at the falls. When he approached, she turned and asked him a question that he has never forgotten. "Do you hear it answering?" She did not explain what she meant. He did not ask. Dum-dum. Dr. Margaret Kowalczyk submitted her draft paper to the Journal of the Acoustical Society of America in the fall of 1994. The submission was acknowledged, but never moved to peer review. Kowalczyk withdrew it 3 months later without explanation. In 1995, she applied for a National Science Foundation grant to conduct follow-up research at Palouse Falls. The application was denied. The rejection letter cited insufficient scientific basis for the proposed investigation. Kowalczyk appealed. The appeal was denied without comment. She left the University of Idaho in 1996. Colleagues describe her departure as sudden. She did not take a position at another institution. She did not publish again. Attempts to contact her for interviews have been unsuccessful. University records indicate that her research files were transferred to departmental storage upon her departure. A 2012 inquiry found that the files had been misplaced during a facility renovation. The original audio recordings from the 1994 study have never been located. Independent researchers have attempted to replicate Kowalczyk's findings with mixed results. A 2008 study by a team from Portland State University found no evidence of the 19 Hz tone, though their equipment was later determined to have a low-frequency cutoff that would have filtered it out. A 2015 amateur investigation using consumer-grade infrasound detectors reported inconclusive anomalies, but did not publish detailed data. The Washington State Parks Department has no official position on the acoustic properties of Palouse Falls. A spokesperson, responding to a media inquiry in 2019, stated that the falls produce natural sounds consistent with waterfalls of similar size, and declined to comment further. Geological surveys of the canyon have noted unusual basalt formations in the plunge pool area, columnar structures that some researchers believe could theoretically act as resonating chambers, but no study has demonstrated how such formations would produce a stable tone, let alone one at exactly 19 Hz. The Palouse people have not commented publicly on the frequency, but a cultural liaison, speaking off the record to a documentary crew in 2020, mentioned that elders discourage extended visits to the falls. "You go, you see, you leave," she said. "You don't stay. You don't listen too long." Palouse Falls remains one of Washington's most photographed natural landmarks. Visitors stand at the overlook, feeling the mist on their faces and the rumble of water in their chests. Most leave within an hour, satisfied by the view, but some report a lingering unease that follows them home. Online forums contain scattered accounts from visitors who describe waking in the night with the sensation of falling, or hearing a low hum in quiet rooms that fades when they try to focus on it. A 2022 post from a user identified only as MK described standing at the overlook and feeling tuned, like a string being adjusted. The post received 3 replies before the thread was deleted. Dr. Kowalczyk's unpublished paper included a final paragraph that survived in a colleague's notes. It read, "The frequency does not originate from the water. It does not originate from the rock. It appears to originate from the space between them, or from something using that space as a channel. Further study is required." No further study was conducted. The falls continued to drop 200 feet into the ancient basalt. The river continues to drain the farmland above, and somewhere beneath the roar, at a frequency just beyond hearing, the tone persists. Constant, precise, waiting. The letters came from a town that barely existed, addressed to people who never had. Dusty, Washington sits along a gravel road in Whitman County, roughly 15 miles southwest of Colfax. It is not a town in any conventional sense. There is no main street, no school, no church. What remains is a grain elevator, a handful of weathered houses, and a post office that operates 3 days a week. The population, according to the 2020 census, is 6. In 1978, it was 11. The community was established in the 1890s as a railway stop for the Oregon Railroad and Navigation Company. Farmers in the surrounding Palouse Hills needed a place to ship their wheat, and Dusty provided it. The name came from the clouds of chaff that hung over the elevator during harvest season, coating everything in a fine golden powder. For decades, the town served its purpose quietly. Trains came and went. Grain moved east. Life continued. By the late 1970s, Dusty had settled into a kind of gentle decay. The railway had long since stopped running. The elevator still operated, but fewer farmers used it each year. The houses that remained were occupied by elderly residents, most of whom had been born within miles of where they would eventually die. They knew each other by name, by family history, by the specific pitch of each other's screen doors. They knew who belonged, which is why the letters were so disturbing. The first letter arrived on March 14, 1978. It was addressed to a woman named Cecilia Vance at a house on the eastern edge of the settlement. The postmark read Dusty W.A., stamped that same morning. The return address was blank. The problem was that no one named Cecilia Vance had ever lived in Dusty. The house the letter was addressed to belonged to Harold and Mildred Gustafson, who had occupied it since 1952. The postmaster at the time, Eugene Frazier, knew this. He set the letter aside, assuming a clerical error. But the envelope was too thick for a standard letter. When Frazier examined it more closely, he found a photograph inside. The image showed the Gustafson house from an unusual angle, not from the road, where any passerby might stand, but from the north, from deep within the wheat field that abutted the property. The perspective was low, as if the photographer had been crouching among the stalks. The timestamp on the photograph's white border read March 12, 1978, 2 days before the letter arrived. Frazier delivered the letter to the Gustafsons, who were unsettled but assumed it was a prank. They kept the photograph but discarded the envelope. Over the next 3 years, 16 more letters arrived. Each followed the same pattern. Each was addressed to a person who did not exist, at a house that did. Each bore a dusty postmark. Each contained a single photograph of the recipient's home, taken from an angle that would have required the photographer to stand in the surrounding fields, sometimes wheat, sometimes fallow ground, sometimes the scrubland that bordered the irrigation ditches. The timestamps varied, but they were always dated 2 days before the letter's arrival. No one in Dusty had seen anyone taking photographs. No one had noticed strangers in the fields. Eugene Frazier kept a log of the letters in a spiral notebook that his daughter donated to the Whitman County Historical Society in 2004. The entries are brief but consistent. The second letter arrived in June 1978, addressed to Martin Solberg at the Petrosky residence. The photograph showed the house from the southwest, across a patch of crested wheatgrass. The third came in October, addressed to Dolores Kwan, at a house that had been vacant for 6 years. The photograph showed the structure from behind, framed by a collapsed fence that no longer existed. It had been removed in 1975. Frazier noted this discrepancy in his log. Photo shows old fence. Fence torn down 3 years ago. How? By 1979, the letters had become a source of quiet anxiety in Dusty. Residents stopped discussing them openly, but checked their mail with visible tension. Mildred Gustafson told a reporter from the Spokane Chronicle in 1983 that she had begun avoiding her windows at night. "I kept thinking someone was out there in the wheat," she said, watching, waiting to take another picture. A retired postal inspector named Leonard Ogunyemi, who reviewed the case informally at Frazier's request in 1980, described the letters as technically impossible. The postmarks were authentic, stamped with Dusty's own cancellation machine, which Frazier controlled. But Frazier had no memory of processing the letters. They simply appeared in the outgoing mail, already stamped, already sorted. Someone would have had to access the post office at night, Ogunyemi wrote in a letter to Frazier. But even then, they couldn't have used the cancellation machine without your key, and you had the only key. Frazier confirmed this. He slept with the key on a chain around his neck. The United States Postal Inspection Service opened an informal inquiry in early 1980 after Frazier submitted copies of 7 letters and photographs to the regional office in Seattle. The case was assigned to Inspector Patricia Delacroix, who visited Dusty in April of that year. Her report, partially released through a Freedom of Information Act request in 2009, describes a low-priority anomaly with no evidence of fraud, threat, or criminal intent. She interviewed all 11 residents, examined the post office, and reviewed Frazier's log. Her conclusions were inconclusive. "The letters appear to originate from within Dusty," she wrote, "but no resident admits to sending them, and no physical evidence supports external involvement. The photographs are of professional quality, suggesting access to darkroom equipment not present in the community. The names on the envelopes do not correspond to any known persons in Washington state, living or deceased. Delacroix recommended closing the case. Her supervisor approved the recommendation. The file was archived in July 1980, but the letters continued. 3 more arrived between August 1980 and February 1981. The final letter, postmarked February 9, 1981, was addressed to Eugene Frazier at his own address. Inside was a photograph of his house taken from the north field, at an angle that would have required the photographer to stand approximately 40 yards into the wheat. The timestamp read February 7th, 2 days earlier. Frazier recognized the angle. It was the same spot where he had stood as a boy, watching his father work the fields. He had never told anyone about that memory. He resigned as postmaster 3 weeks later. He never spoke publicly about the letters again. He died in 1996. His notebook was found in a box labeled "Do Not Open" in his daughter's attic. Attempts to locate the original photographs have been unsuccessful. The Whitman County Historical Society possesses only Frazier's log and photocopies of 4 images, made by a volunteer in 2006. The copies are grainy, but the angles are unmistakable. Each photograph captures a house from a position no casual observer would choose. Too far, too low, too deliberate. Dusty remains inhabited, though barely. The grain elevator still operates during harvest season. The post office still opens 3 days a week, now staffed by a part-time contractor who drives in from Colfax. No letters have been reported since 1981, but residents who lived through that period describe a lingering unease that never fully faded. Mildred Gustafson, in her final interview before her death in 2001, said she still checked the fields from her kitchen window every morning. "I know it sounds foolish," she said, "but I keep expecting to see someone out there, standing in the wheat, holding a camera." The names on the letters, Cecilia Vance, Martin Solberg, Dolores Kwan, and 14 others, have never been traced to any real individuals. Some researchers have speculated that they are anagrams, or references to historical figures, or simply random fabrications. None of the theories have been confirmed. What remains is a stack of photocopies, a spiral notebook, and a question that no one in Dusty has ever been able to answer. Who was writing to people who didn't exist? And how did they know exactly where to stand? The birds do not stop singing on Kamiak Butte, but something stops you from hearing them. Kamiak Butte rises 1,200 feet above the surrounding Palouse farmland in Whitman County, Washington, a forested island in an ocean of wheat. The butte is a remnant of ancient quartzite, part of the same geological formation as Steptoe Butte, 15 miles to the south, but Kamiak is wilder, more heavily wooded, and far less visited. The county park that encompasses it covers nearly 300 acres, crisscrossed by 2 main trails, the 3-mile Pine Ridge Trail and the shorter but steeper North Loop. The butte takes its name from Chief Kamiakan, a leader of the Yakima people who resisted American expansion in the 1850s. The land itself predates human memory. The quartzite beneath the surface formed over 1 billion years ago, making it among the oldest exposed rock in the Pacific Northwest. The forest that covers the butte is predominantly ponderosa pine, with pockets of Douglas fir and grand fir in the cooler ravines. Wildlife is abundant: white-tailed deer, coyotes, wild turkeys, and over 60 species of birds documented by local Audubon chapters. It is the birds that first drew attention to the anomaly. For decades, hikers have reported an unusual stillness near the summit of Kamiak Butte. Online trail reviews mention it casually. eerily quiet up top, no birds singing past the last switchback, peaceful but almost too silent. Most visitors attribute the phenomenon to elevation, wind patterns, or simply the density of the forest. Rangers have offered similar explanations. The butte is quiet, they say, because it is remote, because it is protected, because that is how wilderness is supposed to feel. But in 2011, a wildlife biologist named Dr. Renata Sundquist discovered that the quiet was something else entirely. Dr. Sundquist arrived at Kamiak Butte in May of 2011 as part of a Washington State University research project on songbird populations in fragmented forest habitats. Her methodology was standard: deploy autonomous recording units at multiple elevations, collect data over a 6-week period, and analyze the recordings for species diversity and vocalization patterns. She placed 4 recording units along the Pine Ridge Trail, at the trailhead, at the midpoint, near the summit, and at a rocky outcrop just below the highest point. Each unit was programmed to record continuously during dawn and dusk, the peak hours for birdsong. The first 3 units performed as expected. The recordings captured a rich chorus of songbirds: western meadowlarks, black-capped chickadees, American robins, and dozens of others. The data was clean, consistent, and unremarkable. The 4th unit, positioned just below the summit, recorded something different. The audio files from that location contained birdsong. Dr. Sundquist could see it in the spectrograms, the visual representations of sound frequency over time. The birds were there, they were singing, but the recordings themselves were nearly silent. At first, she assumed equipment failure. She replaced the microphone, recalibrated the unit, and redeployed it. The results were identical. The spectrogram showed acoustic activity. The audio file played back as near total silence, punctuated by faint, distorted fragments of sound that seemed to fade in and out at random. Dr. Sundquist described the phenomenon in her field notes as an acoustic shadow with no source. Something was absorbing the sound before it reached the microphone, but there was nothing between the microphone and the birds. No barrier, no obstruction, just air and trees and open sky. She collected the unit and returned to her lab in Pullman. Her grant period ended 6 weeks later. The findings were never published. In 2013, a journalist named Oliver Sosi contacted Dr. Sundquist while researching an article on unexplained phenomena in the Palouse region. She agreed to speak on the condition that her name not be used in print. Sosi honored that request until after her death in 2021, when her family gave permission to release the interview. "I've been doing field work for 20 years, Dr. Sundquist said in the recorded conversation. I've deployed recording equipment in forests, deserts, wetlands, urban parks. I've dealt with wind noise, equipment malfunctions, interference from power lines. This was none of those things." She described the summit recordings as structurally impossible. The spectrograms indicated sound waves reaching the microphone. The audio playback indicated they had not. "It's as if the sound arrived but didn't survive," she said, like it was being unmade. Sosi also interviewed 2 other individuals who had experienced the quiet on Kamiak Butte. Marcus Bjornstad, a retired park ranger who worked at the butte from 1989 to 2006, recalled dozens of hikers mentioning the silence over the years. He had experienced it himself many times. "You notice it most when you're alone," he said. "You stop walking and you realize you can't hear anything. Not wind, not birds, not your own breathing if you hold still enough. It's like the mountains swallow sound." Bjornstad described one incident in particular. In the summer of 2002, a solo hiker reported becoming disoriented near the summit and wandering off trail for several hours. When rangers found her, she was calm but confused. She said she had been calling for help the entire time. She had heard nothing, not even her own voice. The rangers had been within 200 yards of her position and heard nothing either. A third witness, a bird watcher named Constance Deloria, visited the butte in 2015 specifically to investigate the reports. She brought a portable audio recorder and a decibel meter. Her recordings from the summit matched Dr. Sundquist's findings: spectral activity with minimal audible output. Her decibel meter registered ambient noise levels consistent with a quiet forest, approximately 35 decibels, but the sound itself seemed to have no content. It was like measuring the volume of nothing, she wrote in a blog post that has since been deleted. Deloria also reported a physical sensation near the summit, pressure in her inner ears, similar to the feeling of rapid altitude change. She was at roughly 3,600 feet elevation, well below any threshold that would cause such effects. Babumbo. Whitman County Parks has no official documentation of the acoustic anomaly at Kamiak Butte. A 2017 records request filed by a graduate student at Washington State University returned a single memo from 1994, written by a park maintenance supervisor named Gerald Huff. The memo recommended further assessment of unusual acoustic conditions reported by visitors on the Pine Ridge Trail. No follow-up assessment appears in the files. Gerald Huff died in 2008. His family declined to comment when contacted by researchers. The Washington Department of Natural Resources conducted a routine environmental survey of Kamiak Butte in 2009, assessing soil composition, vegetation health, and wildlife populations. The survey report, 53 pages in length, contains no mention of acoustic anomalies. A footnote on page 41, however, references localized atmospheric conditions at higher elevations without elaboration. The data supporting this footnote is listed as unavailable due to equipment malfunction. Acoustic engineers consulted by independent researchers have struggled to explain the phenomenon. Sound absorption typically requires physical mass, dense foliage, rock formations, or artificial barriers. Kamiak Butte's summit is relatively open, with scattered pines and exposed quartzite. There is no obvious mechanism for absorbing broadband sound across a wide area. One theory proposed by an acoustician at the University of Washington in 2018 suggested that unusual wind patterns could create a shadow zone where sound waves are refracted away from ground-level listeners. But this would not explain Dr. Sundquist's recordings, which were captured during calm conditions with minimal wind. Another theory involved infrasound, low-frequency vibrations below the range of human hearing that can interfere with audio equipment, but infrasound typically produces distortion, not silence. Dr. Sundquist's spectrograms showed clean data. The sound was present. It simply wasn't audible. The Palouse people, whose ancestors lived in this region for thousands of years, have their own understanding of the Butte. An elder from the Coeur d'Alene tribe, speaking to a documentary crew in 2019, described Kamiak as a place where the land listens more than it speaks. She declined to elaborate, but advised visitors to say what you need to say before you reach the top. Kamiak Butte County Park remains open year-round. The Pine Ridge Trail is well-maintained, popular with families and casual hikers. On weekends, the parking lot fills with cars from Pullman, Moscow, and Colfax. Children run along the lower switchbacks. Dogs bark at squirrels. The forest hums with ordinary life. But near the summit, something changes. Visitors still report the quiet. Online reviews continue to mention it, usually in passing, usually dismissed as atmosphere. Rangers no longer address questions about the phenomenon. Dr. Sundquist's recordings remain in a university archive, uncatalogued and unreferenced. The spectrogram files show birdsong that no one has ever heard. Marcus Bjornsted, in his final interview before his death in 2020, offered the closest thing to an explanation anyone has provided. "I spent 17 years on that butte," he said. "I know every trail, every tree, every rock, and I still don't understand the quiet. I just know that it's there, and it's listening." The birds continue to sing on Kamiak Butte. Whether anyone can hear them depends on where you stand. The wheat was real. It was harvested, weighed, and sold. It simply should not have existed. Endicott sits in the rolling wheat country of Whitman County, Washington, a small agricultural community founded in 1882 along the Oregon Railroad and Navigation Company line. The town once thrived as a shipping point for the surrounding farms, its grain elevators rising against the horizon like monuments to abundance. By the 1960s, the population had stabilized at around 500, farmers, merchants, and the families who supported them. Life moved with the seasons, planting in spring, growth through summer, harvest in fall. The Palouse region surrounding Endicott is among the most productive dryland wheat-growing areas in the world. The soil is deep loess, wind-blown silt deposited over millennia, capable of retaining moisture through the dry summers that define the climate. Farmers here developed sophisticated techniques for maximizing yield: summer fallow rotations, careful seed selection, precise timing of planting and harvest. By the mid-20th century, the average acre produced between 40 and 50 bushels of wheat in a good year. These numbers were consistent, predictable, and well documented. The United States Department of Agriculture tracked them through county extension offices, elevator receipts, and farmer surveys. The data formed the foundation of national agricultural planning, export projections, and price stabilization programs, which is why the discrepancy was so difficult to explain. The first indication of something unusual appeared in the fall of 1963. Martin Halverson, a third-generation farmer working 640 acres northeast of Endicott, delivered his harvest to the Endicott Grain Growers Cooperative. The elevator manager, Bernard Koski, weighed the grain and issued a receipt: 31,200 bushels of soft white winter wheat. Halverson checked the receipt twice. According to his planting records, he had seeded 580 acres that spring. At the regional average yield of 48 bushels per acre, he should have harvested approximately 27,800 bushels. The receipt showed 3,400 bushels, more than his land could have produced, an excess of just over 12%. He assumed a calculation error. Koski rechecked the scale. The weight was accurate. Halverson reviewed his seeding logs, his acreage maps, his fuel receipts from planting season. Everything matched. He had planted the same fields he always planted. He had harvested the same fields he always harvested. And somehow he had 12% more wheat than mathematics allowed. Halverson mentioned the discrepancy to his neighbor Arlen Mickelson at the feed store the following week. Mickelson went quiet. He had experienced the same thing, an unexplained surplus of approximately 14%. So had Victor Okonkwo, who farmed the bottomland near Pine Creek. So had the Lindqvist brothers, who worked adjacent parcels west of town. By November of 1963, at least 7 farmers in the Endicott area had reported harvest totals that exceeded their planted acreage by margins ranging from 9 to 17%. The average was 12.4%. None of them reported the discrepancy to the USDA. None of them discussed it publicly. They simply deposited their receipts, collected their payments, and waited to see if it would happen again. It did. Dorothy Koski, Bernard's wife and the cooperative's bookkeeper, was the first to document the pattern formally. She kept meticulous records, carbon copies of every receipt, monthly summaries of total deliveries, annual comparisons with county averages. In the spring of 1967, while preparing tax documents, she noticed that the Endicott Cooperative had consistently received more grain than the surrounding acreage should have produced for 4 consecutive years. She shared her findings with her husband, who dismissed it as favorable weather. She shared them with the county extension agent Howard Petrovich, who found them interesting but inconclusive. Finally, in the summer of 1968, she wrote a letter to the USDA regional office in Spokane requesting an informal review. The response arrived in September. A field investigator named Lawrence Yazzie would visit Endicott during the upcoming harvest to assess the situation. Yazzie arrived on October 3, 1968, accompanied by an agricultural statistician named Dr. Constance Bergman from the Washington State University Extension Service. They spent 2 weeks in the area, interviewing farmers, reviewing cooperative records, and observing harvest operations on multiple farms. Their findings, summarized in a 63-page report submitted to the USDA in December of that year, confirmed the discrepancy and offered no explanation for it. All examined records appear accurate and internally consistent, Yazzie wrote. Farmers report no changes in seed varieties, planting densities, or cultivation practices. Weather patterns for the period in question fall within normal parameters for the region. No evidence of fraud, misreporting, or calculation error was identified. Dr. Bergman's statistical analysis was more direct. The reported yields exceed theoretical maximum production for the documented acreage by a margin that cannot be attributed to measurement variance. The grain exists. It was harvested, weighed, and sold. The source of the surplus remains unexplained. The report recommended further study. No further study was conducted. Farmers who lived through the period offered varied explanations, none of them satisfying. Victor Okonkwo, interviewed by a local historian in 1989, suggested that the scales at the cooperative might have been miscalibrated. But Dorothy Koski's records showed that the scales had been certified annually by the State Department of Weights and Measures. The certifications were on file. The scales were accurate. Arlen Mickelson's son, David, who inherited the family farm in 1975, recalled his father discussing the matter only once. He said the land was being generous, David told a journalist in 2004. He didn't mean it as a metaphor. He meant it literally. The land was giving more than it was supposed to give. Lawrence Yazzie, contacted by researchers in 1992, offered a more cautious assessment. I've investigated agricultural anomalies in 6 states over 30 years, he said. I've seen fraud, I've seen error, I've seen wishful thinking. This was none of those. The numbers were clean. The grain was real. If you're asking me to explain it, I can't. I just wrote down what I found. Dr. Constance Bergman died in 1987 without publishing further analysis. Her personal notes, donated to Washington State University's archives, contain a single reference to the Endicott investigation. Statistical impossibility confirmed. Recommend discontinuation of inquiry. The USDA closed the case in January 1969. The final notation in the file, stamped and initialed by a regional supervisor named Francis Llewellyn, reads, "Statistical anomaly. No further action recommended." The discrepancy continued through 1969. By 1970, reported yields in the Endicott area had returned to normal ranges. No explanation was offered. No follow-up investigation was conducted. Some researchers have suggested that the anomaly was a simple clerical error, perhaps a miscounting of acreage in county records or a systematic overestimation of planted fields. But the farmers themselves kept independent records. Their acreage matched county assessments. Their yields exceeded both. Others have proposed that the discrepancy reflects natural variation, unusually favorable microclimates, undocumented soil conditions, or seed varieties with higher than expected productivity. But the anomaly appeared across multiple farms with different soil types, different seed sources, and different cultivation practices. The only common factor was geography. All affected farms fell within a rough radius of 8 miles from Endicott. The Palouse people, whose ancestors farmed this land long before European settlement, have a word for certain places where growth exceeds expectation. Translated loosely, it means where the earth gives twice. Elders do not consider such places fortunate. They consider them indebted. Endicott today is smaller than it was in the 1960s. The grain elevator still operates, though the cooperative merged with a larger regional concern in 1983. The farms surrounding the town remain productive, their yields consistent with regional averages. No one speaks of the discrepancy anymore. Dorothy Koski died in 2001. Bernard followed her 2 years later. The farmers who experienced the surplus have largely passed on or moved away. Their children inherited land, not questions. But county records from 1963 through 1969 remain on file at the Whitman County Courthouse. The numbers are still there, unchanged by time. Researchers who have examined them find no errors, no inconsistencies, no explanations. 31,200 bushels from 580 acres, 12% more than possible. The wheat was real. It was harvested, weighed, and sold. And somewhere in the rolling hills around Endicott, the soil continues to hold its secrets, offering perhaps only what it chooses to give. Some roads take longer than they should. This one takes less, and no one can explain why. State Route 27 runs north to south through the heart of Washington's Palouse region, connecting Spokane to Pullman through 63 miles of rolling farmland, small towns, and endless curves. The road follows the contours of the land, bending around buttes and dipping through coulees carved by ancient floods. It is not a fast road. The speed limit varies between 50 and 60 miles per hour, reduced through the small communities of Oakesdale, Toccoa, and Garfield. GPS navigation systems calculate the full drive at approximately 75 minutes under optimal conditions. The highway was established in its current form in 1933, though portions of the route follow older wagon roads dating to the 1880s. The terrain demanded curves. The Palouse Hills rise and fall in waves, and early engineers had neither the budget nor the technology to cut through them. Instead, they built around them, creating a highway that never travels straight for more than half a mile at a time. Locals know the road intimately. Generations of farmers have used it to haul grain to elevators. Students have driven it between Spokane and Washington State University, and families have traveled it for weddings, funerals, and holidays. It is an ordinary road, unremarkable in most respects. But since at least the late 1970s, drivers have reported something unusual about the stretch between Toccoa and Oakesdale, a 13-mile segment that passes through some of the most isolated terrain along the route. Something that defies explanation. They arrive early, too early, and they cannot account for the time. The first documented report appears in a 1978 letter to the Spokane Chronicle, written by a woman named Judith Erkenberg. She described driving from Pullman to Spokane on a November evening alone under a moonless sky. Her dashboard clock showed 8:47 when she passed through Toccoa. Her arrival in Oakesdale, 13 miles later, registered at 8:49, 2 minutes for a drive that should have taken at least 12. Erkenberg assumed her clock had malfunctioned. She checked it against her watch the following morning. Both showed the correct time. She dismissed the incident as fatigue or confusion and did not mention it publicly for nearly a decade. In 1986, A graduate student at Washington State University named Anthony Marchetti experienced something similar. He was driving north at approximately 10:30 in the evening, returning to Spokane after visiting friends in Pullman. The night was overcast, with no moon visible. He traveled alone. Marchetti later told a journalist that the road between Toccoa and Oakstille had felt wrong that night. "The curves weren't where I expected them," he said. "I've driven that road dozens of times. I know where the turns are, but that night it felt straight, like I was driving through a different landscape." His GPS, an early Garmin model purchased that same year, predicted arrival at his Spokane apartment at 11:42. He pulled into his parking space at 11:29, 13 minutes ahead of schedule. The discrepancy troubled him enough that he tested the route again the following weekend. The drive took exactly 74 minutes, matching the GPS prediction within seconds. Marchetti documented his experience in a blog post in 2004. The post attracted scattered comments from other drivers who claimed similar experiences. Over the following decade, a small community of researchers and curious locals began compiling accounts, searching for patterns. The pattern they found was consistent and deeply strange. A 2017 Reddit thread titled SR27 Time Slip compiled over 40 first-hand accounts from drivers who reported arriving early on the Toccoa-Oakstille stretch. The accounts shared several common elements. All occurred at night. All occurred on moonless nights, either new moons or heavily overcast conditions. All involved drivers traveling alone. And all described the same perceptual anomaly. The road appeared straight during the missing time, though the actual highway curves continuously through that segment. One poster, identified only as Palouse Driver 89, described a 2014 experience in clinical detail. "I checked my phone GPS when I left Toccoa. It said 12 minutes to Oakstille. I drove normally, no speeding. When I arrived, only 1 minute had passed. I thought my phone had glitched, but the clock matched my car clock and my watch. 12 minutes of driving compressed into 60 seconds. Another poster, Moscow Mom, described a 2011 incident. "My daughter was asleep in the back seat. I remember checking on her in the rearview mirror as I entered Toccoa, then again as I saw the Oakstille water tower. She was in exactly the same position both times, same arm angle, same head tilt. Like no time had passed at all. But according to every clock, 8 minutes did pass. Just not all of them." A truck driver named Luis Mendez, interviewed by a Spokane-based podcaster in 2019, offered a more unsettling detail. "I was hauling a load of seed grain from Lewiston to Spokane. Hit that stretch around 2 in the morning, no moon, no other cars. The road went straight. I know it doesn't. I've driven it 100 times, but that night it went straight. No curves, no hills, just flat pavement disappearing into the dark. I looked down at my odometer. I'd traveled 14 miles in what felt like 2 minutes. When I got to Spokane, I was 19 minutes early. My logbook didn't make sense. I never reported it." Mendez was asked why he hadn't reported the discrepancy. He paused before answering. "What would I say? The road straightened itself? Time skipped? They'd pull my license. None of the drivers reported distress during the experiences. None reported missing memories or confusion. They simply arrived earlier than physics allowed, with no explanation and no evidence beyond their own perception." The Washington State Department of Transportation has no official record of temporal anomalies on State Route 27. A 2015 inquiry by a Spokane journalist received a brief response. "WSDOT does not investigate reports of time discrepancies. We recommend drivers ensure their clocks and GPS devices are properly synchronized. GPS manufacturers contacted about the reports have offered similar dismissals." A Garmin representative suggested that satellite signal interference in rural areas could cause temporary calculation errors. A Google Maps engineer, speaking off the record, noted that the routing algorithm assumes constant speed and does not account for subjective time perception. But the accounts do not describe GPS errors. They describe clocks, mechanical and digital, showing less elapsed time than the distance traveled should require. They describe odometers registering correct mileage. They describe a road that bends, straightening itself in the darkness. Independent researchers have proposed several theories. One geologist suggested that the Palouse's lowest soil, among the deepest in the world, might contain magnetic anomalies that affect perception. An atmospheric scientist speculated about localized gravitational fluctuations caused by dense basalt formations beneath the surface. A psychologist proposed that monotonous nighttime driving through rolling terrain could induce a dissociative state in which time perception becomes unreliable. None of these theories explain why the phenomenon occurs only on moonless nights, only when drivers are alone, and only on that specific 13-mile stretch. A 2020 study by a physics graduate student at the University of Idaho attempted to measure the anomaly directly. She drove the route 12 times over 3 months, equipped with synchronized atomic clocks, dashcam footage, and continuous GPS tracking. On 11 drives, all measurements were normal. On the 12th, a moonless night in late November, her dashcam recorded 13 miles of continuous footage showing a curving road. Her atomic clocks showed 8 minutes and 42 seconds of elapsed time. Her arrival clock showed 6 minutes and 11 seconds. The discrepancy was 2 minutes and 31 seconds. Her footage showed curves. Her memory recalled a straight road. She withdrew the study before publication, citing methodological concerns. The Palouse people, who have lived in this region for thousands of years, do not speak publicly about the road. But a cultural liaison from the Coeur d'Alene tribe, asked about the phenomenon in 2018, offered a single observation. Some paths are older than the roads built on them. Some distances are not fixed. State Route 27 remains one of the most traveled rural highways in eastern Washington. Thousands of drivers use it daily, arriving at their destinations on time, experiencing nothing unusual. But on certain nights, moonless, dark, solitary, some drivers arrive early. They check their clocks, their odometers, their fuel gauges. Everything matches except the time. They do not report it. They do not discuss it. They file it away as a glitch, a mistake, a trick of fatigue. And yet the accounts continue to accumulate, quiet and consistent, describing a road that should not exist, a road that runs straight through country that has never been straight, delivering travelers to destinations before they should arrive. The curves are still there in daylight. They are marked on every map, but on moonless nights alone, the road remembers something older than the highway, something that measures distance differently, and it delivers you early, whether you want to arrive or not. For 4 minutes on a cold March evening, the choir of St. Boniface sang a duet with itself. Uniontown lies in the southeastern corner of Whitman County, Washington, a small agricultural community founded by German Catholic immigrants in the 1870s. The town occupies a gentle slope in the Palouse Hills, surrounded by wheat fields that stretch unbroken to the horizon in every direction. At its peak in the early 20th century, Uniontown had a population of nearly 500. By 1953, that number had declined to approximately 300, most of them farmers and their families who had worked the same land for generations. St. Boniface Catholic Church has anchored the community since 1876, when the original wooden structure was built to serve the growing German settlement. The current brick church, constructed in 1905, stands at the center of town, a modest Romanesque building with a single bell tower, stained glass windows imported from Bavaria, and acoustics that have long been praised for their clarity. The church has survived fires, economic depression, and the steady exodus of young people to larger cities. It remains active today, though its congregation has dwindled. The choir of St. Boniface has been a point of pride since the church's founding. German Catholic traditions emphasize sacred music, and the farmers of Uniontown maintained those traditions with dedication. In 1953, the choir consisted of 14 members, 8 women and 6 men, ranging in age from 17 to 64. They rehearsed every Wednesday evening and performed at Sunday Mass, following a repertoire of Latin hymns and German devotional songs that had been passed down for decades. March 14, 1953 was a Saturday, an unusual day for choir practice but necessary because of a scheduling conflict the previous Wednesday. The weather was cold and clear with temperatures in the low 20s. A new moon had risen the night before, leaving the sky unusually dark. What happened that evening was never officially explained. The choir assembled at 7 o'clock in the evening for a 90-minute rehearsal in preparation for Palm Sunday. The church was empty except for the 14 singers and the choir director, Father Bernard Eickhoff, a German-born priest who had served St. Boniface since 1947. The church doors were closed against the cold. No other parishioners were present. At approximately 7:25, the choir began rehearsing Parce Domine, a traditional Lenten hymn. The piece is sung in 4-part harmony, with verses alternating between the full choir and solo passages. Father Eickhoff conducted from his position near the altar, facing the choir loft. According to accounts collected in the following days, the anomaly began during the second verse. Martha Schreiber, the choir's lead soprano, was the first to notice. She later described hearing her own voice coming from outside the church, through the walls, from somewhere in the darkness beyond the stained glass windows. The external voice was singing the same hymn, the same words in what she recognized as her own timbre. But it was one measure behind. Within seconds, other choir members reported the same experience. Each heard their own voice, distinct and recognizable, emanating from outside the building and lagging precisely one measure behind their actual singing. The effect was described as neither echo nor delay. The external voices were too clear, too present, too perfectly synchronized in their offset. Father Eickhoff stopped conducting. The choir fell silent. The external voices continued for approximately 3 more seconds, completing the measure, then stopped as well. The silence that followed lasted nearly a minute. No one moved. No one spoke. Father Eickhoff walked to the nearest window and looked out into the darkness. He saw nothing. No figures, no movement, no source for the sound. He opened the church's main door and stepped onto the front steps. The night was still. The town was quiet. The wheat fields beyond the road stood motionless under the starless sky. He returned inside, closed the door, and instructed the choir to resume practice. They completed the rehearsal without further incident. Father Eickhoff documented the event in the parish records that same evening. His entry, written in his precise German script, described the phenomenon in clinical terms. During rehearsal of Parce Domine, all choir members reported hearing their own voices singing from outside the church, one measure behind the actual performance. Duration, approximately 4 minutes. No visible source identified. No explanation offered. The entry was later removed from the official parish archives. Only a handwritten copy, made by Father Eickhoff himself and preserved in his personal papers, survives. Those papers were donated to the Diocese of Spokane after his death in 1971 and remained uncatalogued until 2002. Choir members who spoke about the incident in later years offered consistent but incomplete accounts. Gertrude Holm, who sang alto, was interviewed by a local historian in 1988. "I know my own voice," she said. "I've been singing since I was 6 years old. What I heard outside that window was my voice. Not similar, mine. Singing the same words I was singing, but behind me, like it was answering." Heinrich Vetter, a tenor, described the experience differently. "It felt like the church was listening," he told a journalist in 1994, "like it heard us singing and decided to sing back, but not at the same time. Delayed, as if it needed a moment to learn the music." Vetter's daughter, Rosemary Kessler, recalled her father's reluctance to discuss the incident. "He only mentioned it twice. In my life," she said in a 2010 interview. "Both times he said the same thing. We heard ourselves outside, all of us, at the same time, and Father Eichhoff never told us why." Father Eichhoff himself never offered a public explanation. Parishioners who asked about the incident were reportedly told that it was a matter for private reflection. He continued to lead the choir until his death, but he never scheduled another Saturday evening rehearsal. The Diocese of Spokane has no official record of the incident. A 2004 inquiry submitted by a researcher at Gonzaga University received a brief response, stating that historical parish records from St. Boniface are incomplete for the period in question, and that no documentation of unusual events from March 1953 is available. This contradicts Father Eichhoff's own notation, which clearly references the date, the time, and the nature of the anomaly. The discrepancy has never been addressed. Acoustic researchers consulted about the incident have proposed several theories, none of them satisfying. One hypothesis suggests that the church's architecture created an unusual resonance effect, causing the choir's voices to reflect off exterior surfaces and return with a perceptible delay. But acoustic delays of one full musical measure, approximately 2 to 3 seconds at the tempo of Parce Domine, would require a reflecting surface several hundred feet away. The nearest buildings were within 50 feet of the church. The wheat fields, while vast, do not reflect sound. Another theory involves atmospheric ducting, a phenomenon in which temperature inversions cause sound waves to travel unusual distances, but ducting typically carries sound away from its source, not back toward it. And it does not explain how each choir member heard their own specific voice rather than a blended chorus. A psychologist at Washington State University, asked about the incident in 2015, suggested the possibility of shared auditory hallucination induced by group expectation and environmental factors. But no choir member reported any expectation of unusual events. No prior incidents had occurred. The rehearsal was routine until it was not. Local folklore offers its own interpretation. Older residents of Uniontown, particularly those with roots in the original German settlement, speak of certain nights when the land listens. They do not elaborate on what this means. They do not connect it explicitly to the choir incident. But when asked about March 14, 1953, several have responded with the same phrase: "That was one of those nights." The Palouse people, whose territory once included this region, have largely declined to comment on the incident. A cultural liaison from the Nez Perce tribe, asked about acoustic anomalies in the Palouse Hills, offered only a brief observation. Sound behaves differently. Here, it always has. The settlers learned that eventually. St. Boniface Catholic Church still holds weekly Mass. The choir still sings, though its membership has declined to fewer than 10. The building has been renovated twice since 1953, but the acoustics remain unchanged, still praised, still clear, still capable of carrying a voice from the loft to the farthest pew without amplification. The hymn Parce Domine remains in the repertoire. It is sung each year during Lent, as it has been for over a century. No one has reported hearing external voices since 1953. The incident has faded from active memory, preserved only in Father Eichhoff's handwritten copy and the recollections of a handful of elderly parishioners. But those who remember describe the same lingering detail. The external voices did not sound frightened or aggressive. They did not sound inhuman. They sounded, by all accounts, exactly like the choir. Same pitch, same timbre, same careful attention to the Latin phrasing. The only difference was the timing, one measure behind, as if something outside the church had been waiting for the music to begin, as if it had learned the hymn long ago and was simply waiting for the right night to join in. The stake would not stay where they put it. Pullman sits at the confluence of three creeks in the rolling Palouse Hills of southeastern Washington, a university town that grew from a small agricultural settlement into the permanent home of Washington State University. The city's origins trace to 1876, when Bolin Farr became the first white settler to claim land in what was then called Three Forks. By 1881, enough settlers had arrived to warrant an official survey, the formal documentation of property boundaries that would allow the nascent community to incorporate, sell lots, and establish legal ownership of the land. The survey was commissioned by Whitman County and conducted in the late spring of 1881 by a team led by Josiah Whitmore, a surveyor with 15 years of experience in territorial Washington. Whitmore had platted numerous towns across the region, from Walla Walla to Spokane Falls, and his reputation for precision was well established. His crew consisted of three men: chainman Frederick Olson, rodman Samuel Begay, and assistant surveyor Theodore Hamill. The work proceeded normally for the first 4 days. The team established the southern boundary along what is now Grand Avenue, then moved east and north, setting iron stakes at regular intervals to mark the edges of the original plat. By the 5th day, they had reached the northwest corner, a point near a natural spring that fed into one of the creeks. It was here that the trouble began. Chillicum. Whitmore's field journal, preserved in the Washington State Archives, documents the anomaly in terse, professional language. The entry for May 17, 1881 reads, "Northwest corner stake placed at 1400 hours, iron pin 18 inches depth, tamped and secured. Position verified by transit." The entry for May 18th reads, "Northwest stake found displaced. Distance from original position, 4 feet 7 inches. Direction, north-northeast. Stake intact. No evidence of disturbance to surrounding soil. Replaced and resecured." The pattern repeated for 11 consecutive days. Each morning, the crew arrived at the northwest corner to find the iron stake exactly 4.7 feet from where they had driven it the previous afternoon. The direction was consistent, north-northeast, approximately 22 degrees from true north. The stake showed no signs of having been pulled or pried. The soil around it appeared undisturbed. It was as if the earth itself had shifted the marker during the night. Whitmore initially suspected sabotage. Land disputes were common in territorial Washington, and a misplaced boundary stake could redirect property lines worth hundreds of dollars. He assigned Frederick Olson to watch the stake overnight on May 21st. Olson's account, recorded in a deposition given later that summer, describes a quiet night. He arrived at sunset, positioned himself approximately 30 yards from the stake, and maintained observation until dawn. He saw no one approach the marker. He heard no unusual sounds. At first light, he walked to the corner and found the stake 4.7 feet north-northeast of its surveyed position. "I did not sleep," Olson stated in the deposition. "I did not look away for more than a few seconds at a time. The stake moved, but I did not see it move." Theodore Hamill, the assistant surveyor, kept a personal diary separate from the official field notes. His entries during this period reveal a growing unease within the crew. "Whitmore is troubled but will not say so," Hamill wrote on May 22nd. "He has resurveyed the corner 3 times. The mathematics are correct. The instruments are calibrated. The stake simply will not hold its position." On May 24th, Hamill recorded a conversation with Samuel Begay, the Navajo rodman who had worked with Whitmore for nearly a decade. Begay says he has seen this before, once, in the Arizona Territory. He would not elaborate. When I pressed him, he said only that some ground does not wish to be marked. "I do not know what to make of this." The crew attempted several modifications to their approach. They used deeper stakes, 24 inches instead of 18. They tried multiple stakes in a triangular pattern. They even poured molten lead around the base of one pin to anchor it more firmly. Each morning, the result was the same. The stake had moved 4.7 feet. The direction was always north-northeast. On May 28th, Whitmore made a decision that he recorded without explanation in his field journal. "Iron stake abandoned. Corner marked with dressed stone 3 feet by 2 feet by 18 inches, set flush with ground surface." The stone did not move. The survey was completed on June 1st, 1881. The plat was filed with Whitman County later that month. The town of Pullman was officially incorporated in 1888. The northwest corner of the original plat corresponds to a location near the intersection of present-day Stadium Way and Spring Street, approximately 40 yards from where a natural spring once emerged before being diverted and paved over in the early 20th century. Researchers who have examined Whitmore's records have proposed various explanations for the repeating displacement. One theory involves frost heave, the expansion and contraction of frozen soil that can shift objects near the surface. But the incidents occurred in late May, when nighttime temperatures in Pullman rarely dropped below freezing. Whitmore's journal records no frost during the survey period. Another theory suggests animal activity, specifically burrowing rodents that might have undermined the stake's foundation. But the displacement was too consistent. Exactly 4.7 feet, exactly the same. Direction, every single time. Animal disturbance would produce irregular movement. A geologist at Washington State University, Dr. Eleanor Vasquez, reviewed the records in 2008 as part of a study on historical surveying anomalies. Her analysis found no geological explanation for the phenomenon. "The soil composition at that location is typical Palouse-less," she wrote. "There's no evidence of subsidence, seismic activity, or unusual magnetic properties. The displacement pattern is inexplicable by any known geological process." Dr. Vasquez also noted a curious detail in the county archives. The original plat map, filed in 1881, shows the northwest corner marked with an asterisk and a handwritten notation, "Stone marker, see surveyor's notes." But the surveyor's notes referenced by the notation are missing from the file. A 2010 inquiry to the County Records Office confirmed that the notes had been removed or misfiled at an unknown date. The spring that once flowed near the northwest corner was documented in early Pullman maps, but does not appear in any records after 1904. City planning documents from that year reference remediation of seasonal water features near Stadium Way, but provide no further details. The spring's exact location is no longer known. Local historians have occasionally mentioned the surveying incident, though it rarely appears in official accounts of Pullman's founding. A 1952 article in the Pullman Herald referenced early difficulties in establishing the town's boundaries without elaboration. A 1991 master's thesis on Whitman County history devoted a single paragraph to the incident, calling it an interesting footnote, and noting that the cause of the stake displacement was never determined. Pullman today is a city of approximately 34,000 people, dominated by the university that has shaped its identity for over a century. The original plat boundaries have long since been absorbed into a larger urban grid. The northwest corner is marked by no monument, no historical plaque, no indication that anything unusual ever occurred there. But the stone that Josiah Whitmore placed in May of 1881 may still be there, somewhere beneath the sidewalks and utility lines, flush with a ground surface that has been paved and repaved countless times. Whitmore himself never publicly discussed the incident after filing his survey. He continued working as a surveyor until his death in 1897. His personal papers, donated to the Washington State Historical Society, contain no further reference to the Pullman survey. Frederick Olson, the chainman who watched the stake overnight, left surveying within a year of the incident and took up farming near Spokane. His deposition, the only first-hand account of the observation attempt, was filed with the county and forgotten until a researcher discovered it in 1986. Samuel B. Gay returned to Arizona in 1883. No record of his later life has been found. The question of why the stake moved remains unanswered. The question of where it was trying to go 4.7 feet at a time, north-northeast, towards something beyond the spring has never been asked. The soil at the northwest corner accepted the stone. It held its position. It holds it still. But Whitmore's journal contains one final entry about the incident written on the day he abandoned the iron stake. It reads simply, "The ground here is unwilling." He did not explain what he meant. Perhaps he did not know. The photograph shows something that had not happened yet. Oaksdale lies in the heart of Washington's Palouse country, a small farming community approximately 40 miles south of Spokane. The town was founded in 1886, named after a local landowner, and grew quickly as wheat farming transformed the rolling hills into one of the most productive agricultural regions in the nation. By the turn of the 20th century, Oaksdale had a population of nearly 800, with a bank, a hotel, several churches, and a row of brick commercial buildings along Main Street that gave the town an air of permanence and prosperity. The Oaksdale grain elevator, constructed in 1902, became the economic center of the community. Farmers from across the region hauled their wheat there for storage and shipment, and the elevator's tall wooden structure dominated the skyline. It stood for over 2 decades as a symbol of the town's success. On August 14, 1923, the elevator caught fire. The cause was never officially determined. Some suspected spontaneous combustion from grain dust, others blamed faulty wiring, but the result was catastrophic. The fire consumed the elevator within hours, spreading to nearby structures and destroying nearly half of the commercial district. 3 people died. The town rebuilt, but the fire marked a turning point in Oaksdale's history. The population began a slow decline that continues to this day. The fire was well documented at the time. The Spokane Chronicle published a front-page story on August 15, 1923. Photographs of the smoldering ruins appeared in regional newspapers. The event is commemorated in the Whitman County Historical Society's archives, with multiple primary sources confirming the date, the location, and the extent of the damage, none of which explains the photograph that appeared 85 years later. In the spring of 2008, a private collector named Raymond Estes attended an estate sale at a farmhouse 3 miles outside Oaksdale. The property had belonged to the Hendrickson family, whose roots in the area stretched back to the original settlement. The last surviving member, Ingrid Hendrickson, had died the previous winter at the age of 94. Her estate included furniture, farm equipment, and several boxes of personal effects accumulated over more than a century. Estes specialized in early Pacific Northwest photography. He purchased 3 boxes of photographs and glass plate negatives for $200, hoping to find items suitable for his collection or resale to regional museums. Most of the contents were unremarkable: wedding portraits, family gatherings, faded images of wheat harvests, and church picnics. But one item stopped him. It was a daguerreotype, a type of photograph produced through an early process that involved silver-coated copper plates. The technique was common in the mid-19th century but had largely fallen out of use by the 1880s. The plate itself showed signs of age consistent with the period: tarnishing at the edges, minor scratches across the surface, the characteristic mirror-like quality of authentic daguerreotypes. The image depicted Main Street in Oakdale, looking north from approximately the intersection with Steptoe Street. The buildings were recognizable: the Oakdale Bank on the left, the Whitman Hotel on the right, a row of storefronts extending into the distance. Horse-drawn wagons lined the unpaved road. Men in period clothing stood on wooden sidewalks. The grain elevator was visible at the far end of the street, its silhouette sharp against a cloudless sky. In the foreground, slightly to the right of center, stood a woman in a dark dress. She faced the camera directly, her expression neutral, her hands holding a folded newspaper at chest height. The newspaper's masthead was not visible, but the headline was partially legible. Estes examined the photograph under magnification. The headline appeared to read, "Oakdale Elevator Destroyed by Fire." The daguerreotype bore a handwritten notation on its protective case: Main Street, Oakdale, WT, 1891. Washington Territory became Washington State in 1889. The notation suggested the photograph was made no later than 1891. The fire occurred in 1923. Estes brought the photograph to the Whitman County Historical Society in the fall of 2008, seeking verification. The Society's archivist at the time, Patricia Sundberg, examined the daguerreotype and confirmed its apparent authenticity. The plate composition, the chemical signatures, and the physical degradation were all consistent with daguerreotypes produced in the late 19th century. "I've handled hundreds of images from this period," Sundberg told a journalist in 2010. "This one is real. The process is correct. The aging is correct. I can't explain what's in it, but I can tell you the plate itself is genuine." The Historical Society arranged for digital enhancement of the image through a forensic photography laboratory at Eastern Washington University. The enhanced scan confirmed what Estes had seen. The newspaper headline clearly referenced a fire at the Oakdale elevator. Additional text, previously illegible, appeared to include a date, though the numbers were too degraded to read with certainty. Dr. Marcus Reinhold, a professor of history at Washington State University, who reviewed the enhanced image, expressed cautious skepticism. "The simplest explanation is that the daguerreotype is a reproduction," he said. "Someone in the 1920s or later could have created an image using period-appropriate materials to make it appear older than it was. It would require considerable skill, but it's not impossible." But Reinhold also acknowledged the difficulties with this theory. "Daguerreotypes are extremely hard to fake," he said. "The process is complex, the materials are rare, and the results are distinctive. If this is a forgery, it's one of the best I've ever seen." The woman in the photograph has never been identified. Her clothing is consistent with styles worn in the late 19th century, but no records in the Hendrickson family archives mention her. The newspaper she holds does not match any known publication from the region. The Oakdale Gazette, the town's primary newspaper in 1891, used a different masthead format. Raymond Estes, in a 2012 interview, described his ongoing uncertainty about the image. "I've spent 4 years trying to explain it," he said. "I've consulted with experts in photography, in local history, in forensic imaging. Nobody can tell me how that headline got into that photograph. Nobody can tell me who that woman is. Nobody can tell me why she's looking at the camera like she knows something we don't. The daguerreotype was donated to the Whitman County Historical Society in 2012, where it remains in the permanent collection. It is cataloged as Oakdale Street Scene, circa 1891, provenance uncertain. The catalog entry includes a note. Image contains apparent anachronism requiring further study. No further study has been conducted. Attempts to trace the photograph's history through the Hendrickson family have produced limited results. Ingrid Hendrickson's nephew, Carl Lindqvist, recalled seeing the image as a child in the 1950s. Aunt Ingrid kept it in a box with other old pictures, he said in a 2014 interview. I remember asking about the woman, and she said she didn't know who it was. She said the picture had always been in the family, as long as anyone could remember. Lindqvist also recalled something his aunt had mentioned once in passing about the photograph. She said her grandmother, my great-great-grandmother, used to keep it separate from the other pictures. She said it wasn't supposed to be looked at too long. When asked why, Lindqvist shook his head. She didn't say. I was a kid. I didn't press her. The Hendrickson family arrived in Oakdale in 1887. Family records indicate they were present for the founding of the town, the construction of the grain elevator, and the fire that destroyed it. 3 Hendricksons were among the volunteers who fought the blaze. One of them, a young woman named Alma Hendrickson, was photographed at the scene by a Spokane Chronicle reporter. That photograph, taken on August 15, 1923, shows her standing in front of the smoldering ruins. She bears a notable resemblance to the woman in the daguerreotype. The same posture, the same direct gaze, the same neutral expression. Alma Hendrickson died in 1967. She never married. She left no children. Her personal effects were absorbed into the family estate and remained there until Ingrid's death in 2007. The photograph from Oakdale sits in a climate-controlled archive in Colfax, Washington, viewable by appointment only. Few people request to see it. Fewer still know it exists. But those who have examined it describe the same unsettling sensation. The image is sharp, the detail remarkable, the woman's gaze unnervingly direct. She holds the newspaper as if presenting it, not reading it, not folding it away, but displaying it for the camera, for whoever might look at it later. The fire occurred 32 years after the photograph was supposedly taken. The headline she holds announces an event that had not yet happened. Some anomalies can be explained by error, by forgery, by the limitations of memory and documentation. Some cannot. The daguerreotype from Oakdale shows Main Street as it appeared in 1891. It shows a woman who may or may not have been Alma Hendrickson, or her grandmother, or someone else entirely. It shows a newspaper announcing a disaster that would not occur until 1923. And it shows, in the background, the grain elevator standing tall and whole, the same elevator that would burn to the ground on a summer afternoon 3 decades later, exactly as the headline predicted. The woman in the photograph knew. The question is, how? The wells do not echo, they reply. Colfax is the county seat of Whitman County, Washington, a small city of approximately 3,000 people nestled in a narrow valley where the north and south forks of the Palouse River converge. The town was established in 1870 and grew alongside the agricultural industry that transformed the surrounding hills into some of the most productive wheat-growing land in the world. The terrain is defined by rolling loess deposits, fine wind-blown soil accumulated over millennia, underlain by layers of Columbia River basalt from volcanic eruptions millions of years ago. Water has always been essential to life in the Palouse. Before modern irrigation and municipal systems, farmers relied on wells to access the aquifers trapped between basalt layers. The region's artesian wells were particularly valued. Some flowed naturally under pressure, bringing cold, clear water to the surface without pumping. Dozens of these wells were drilled between 1870 and 1930, scattered across the farmland surrounding Colfax. Many remain today, though most have been capped or abandoned as rural properties consolidated and municipal water became available. The wells vary in depth from 100 to over 400 feet. They tap into the Grande Ronde Aquifer, a vast underground water system that extends beneath much of eastern Washington and into Oregon and Idaho. The geology is complex: fractured basalt, interbedded sediments, and confined aquifer zones that can produce unusual hydraulic conditions. It is the acoustic conditions, however, that have drawn attention. For as long as anyone can remember, farmers in the area have warned their children, "Do not shout into the old wells." The warning is usually delivered without explanation, passed from parent to child as casually as advice about avoiding barbed wire or staying clear of irrigation equipment. Most dismiss it as superstition. Those who have tested it describe something harder to dismiss. The earliest documented account of the phenomenon appears in a 1908 letter written by a homesteader named Elias Drummond to his brother in Minnesota. Drummond had recently purchased a farm 5 miles northeast of Colfax, and the property included an artesian well drilled sometime in the 1890s. "I made the mistake of calling down into it," Drummond wrote, "just my name, to hear the echo. What came back was not my voice. It was deeper, slower, and it waited before speaking. 7 heartbeats. I counted. I have not called into the well since, and I advise you not to do so if you ever visit." The letter was preserved in the Drummond family papers and donated to the Whitman County Historical Society in 1987. It received little attention until a graduate student at Washington State University conducting research on regional folklore discovered it in 2000. The student, Mariana Sokolova, was writing her thesis on oral traditions in agricultural communities of the Palouse. She found references to the wells in multiple sources: a 1932 newspaper article about unusual acoustic properties observed in rural wells, a 1955 Extension Service bulletin that mentioned reported anomalies without elaboration, and several interviews with elderly farmers who confirmed the warning but declined to discuss their own experiences. In the spring of 2001, Sokolova decided to investigate firsthand. She located 3 abandoned artesian wells on properties whose owners granted her access. Each well had been capped with wooden or concrete covers, but the caps could be removed with permission. She brought audio recording equipment and a standardized protocol. She would shout a single word into each well, record the result, and measure the delay before any audible response. The first 2 wells produced no unusual results, standard echoes consistent with their depth and construction. The third well, located on a former dairy farm approximately 8 miles from Colfax, was different. Sokolova's recording from that site has been analyzed multiple times over the past 2 decades. The original is held in the university's folklore archive, and copies have circulated among acoustic researchers and enthusiasts of unexplained phenomena. The recording captures Sokolova removing the wooden cap from the well, a dry scraping sound, followed by approximately 10 seconds of ambient noise, wind, distant birds, the hum of the recording equipment. Then her voice, clear and close to the microphone, shouts a single word. "Hello." 7 seconds of silence follow. Then a response emerges from the well. The word is the same, "Hello," but the voice is not Sokolova's. It is lower in pitch, with a resonance that does not match the well's dimensions. The timing is precise, 7 seconds, consistent with Elias Drummond's account from 93 years earlier. Sokolova later described the experience in measured terms. "I expected an echo," she said in a 2004 interview. "What I heard was a reply. The distinction may seem semantic, but it's not. An echo is a reflection. This was something else. It felt like the well was listening and choosing to respond." Her recording equipment captured something she did not hear in the moment. When she analyzed the audio later that evening, she discovered that the response contained frequencies below the range of her original shout. Specifically, the response included a fundamental tone at approximately 14 hertz, well below the threshold of human hearing and well below anything her voice could produce. "My shout peaked at around 200 hertz," she said. "The response went down to 14. That's not an echo. That's additional information." Acoustic engineers who have examined Sokolova's recording have offered various explanations, none of them conclusive. One theory involves resonance within the well shaft itself. Artesian wells in the region penetrate multiple basalt layers, creating irregular cavities that could theoretically amplify or modify sound waves. But resonance effects typically produce higher frequencies, not lower ones. The 14 Hz tone should not have appeared in a response to a 200 Hz input. Another theory proposes that Sokolova's recording captured ambient infrasound from geological sources, perhaps seismic activity or subsurface water movement coincidentally timed with her shout. But the 7-second delay is too precise for coincidence, and the response clearly reproduces her word. It is not random noise, it is communication. Dr. Henrik Johansson, a geophysicist at the University of Washington, who reviewed the recording in 2009, offered a cautious assessment. "The data is anomalous," he said. "I can't explain the infrasonic component and I can't explain the delay. What I can say is that the recording appears authentic. There's no evidence of tampering or post-production modification." Sokolova attempted to replicate her results at the same well in 2002. She brought improved equipment and a team of 3 observers. The well produced no response. She returned in 2003 alone at approximately the same time of day as her original recording. The response occurred again, the same word, the same voice, the same 7-second delay. Her recording captured the same infrasonic component. "It only answers when I'm alone," she noted in her research journal. "I don't know why. I don't know if it's responding to me specifically, or to solitude, or to something else I haven't identified." The property owner, a retired farmer named Walter Lindqvist, had lived on the land for over 50 years. When Sokolova asked him about the well, he confirmed the family warning, but would not discuss his own experiences. "My father told me not to call into it," he said. "I listened. I suggest you do the same." Lindqvist died in 2011. His heirs sold the property, and the well was permanently sealed with concrete shortly afterward. No further recordings have been made at that site. Mariana Sokolova completed her thesis in 2003, but did not include the well recordings. She cited insufficient data for academic analysis and shifted her focus to other aspects of Palouse folklore. She left academia in 2007 and has declined requests for interviews since 2012. Her recordings remain in the university archive, classified under Acoustic Anomalies Unverified. Requests to access them require departmental approval, which is rarely granted. Other wells in the Colfax area have been tested informally by locals and curiosity seekers over the years. Results are inconsistent. Some report nothing unusual. Others describe the same phenomenon, a response in a voice not their own. After a delay of exactly 7 seconds, the pattern has never been explained. The warning persists. Older farmers in the region still advise their children and grandchildren not to shout into the wells. Most frame it as practical caution. The wells are deep, the edges unstable, the water unsafe to drink. But some offer a different reason. The wells remember everything you say to them, one farmer told a journalist in 2015, and they say it back, eventually, in their own time, in their own voice. He paused before adding, "Some folks think the 7 seconds is the delay. I think it's just how long it takes them to decide whether to answer." The wells sit silent across the Palouse, most of them capped, most of them forgotten. The aquifer beneath them continues to flow, cold and dark, through fractures in rock that formed before life existed on land. If you find one that is still open, the locals will tell you what to do. Walk away. Do not call down, because something might call back. The railroad ran through here for 70 years. The mile that carried it does not exist. The Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul, and Pacific Railroad, commonly known as the Milwaukee Road, was one of the great transcontinental rail lines of the American West. Completed in 1909, its Pacific extension stretched from the Midwest to Puget Sound, crossing Montana, Idaho, and Washington through some of the most challenging terrain in the country. The Palouse region of southeastern Washington offered relatively gentle passage, rolling wheat hills, shallow coulees, and a landscape that required minimal tunneling or bridge work. The route through Whitman County followed the natural contours of the land, passing through or near the communities of Rosalia, Oakdale, Toccoa, and dozens of smaller settlements that depended on the railroad for their economic survival. Grain elevators rose along the tracks, towns incorporated around stations. The railroad was not merely infrastructure, it was the circulatory system of the agricultural economy. Rosalia sits approximately 30 miles south of Spokane, a small town that grew around the Milwaukee Road's arrival. The tracks entered from the northwest, curved through the valley, and continued southeast toward the Idaho border. The route was surveyed in 1906, constructed between 1907 and 1909, and operated continuously until the Milwaukee Road's bankruptcy in 1977. The final trains ran in 1980. After abandonment, much of the corridor was converted to trails or returned to agricultural use. The rail bed remained visible for decades, a raised grade cutting through wheat fields, identifiable by the slight elevation and the different vegetation that grew where ballast had been laid. But approximately 4 miles southeast of Rosalia, the corridor disappears. The discrepancy was first noted in 1983 by a land surveyor named Douglas Fairweather, who was conducting a boundary assessment for a property transfer in the area. His assignment required him to reference the abandoned Milwaukee Road right-of-way, which appeared on county maps as a continuous line through the affected parcels. Fairweather's field notes, preserved in the Whitman County Assessor's Office, describe what he found. Rail corridor visible and consistent from Rosalia southeast for approximately 3.2 miles. At this point, corridor terminates abruptly. No grade, no fill, no evidence of prior construction. Corridor resumes approximately 1.1 miles southeast. Gap contains undisturbed native soil and vegetation consistent with never having been developed. He assumed a mapping error. The county assessor's office had inherited records from multiple sources during railroad consolidations and bankruptcies, and clerical mistakes were common. Fairweather noted the discrepancy in his report and moved on. But the mapping error, if that's what it was, appeared on every map he checked. The 1909 completion survey showed a continuous line. The 1920 topographic quadrangle showed a continuous line. The 1954 county road map showed a continuous line. Every official document indicated that the Milwaukee Road ran uninterrupted through this section of Whitman County. Every document except the land itself. Fairweather returned to the site twice more during the 1980s, each time confirming his original observation. The gap was real. The corridor simply did not exist in that 1.1-mile stretch. There was no evidence it ever had. Word of the discrepancy spread slowly through the small community of railroad historians and local surveyors who took interest in such matters. In 1991, a retired civil engineer named Barbara Mickelson walked the entire abandoned corridor from Rosalia to the county line, documenting the route with photographs and GPS coordinates. Her findings matched Fairweather's. The rail bed is clear and obvious for miles in both directions, she wrote in a letter to the Whitman County Historical Society. You can see where the ties rotted, where the ballast settled, where farmers have plowed up to the edge of the grade. Then it stops, not gradually, suddenly, as if someone drew a line and said, "This is where the railroad ends." A mile later, it begins again exactly the same way. Whatever was supposed to connect those 2 points was never built. Mickelson contacted the successor companies that had absorbed the Milwaukee Road's assets after bankruptcy. She received no response from the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, which had acquired portions of the network. A clerk at the Chicago office of the surviving corporate entity sent her a form letter stating that historical records from the Pacific Extension were incomplete and not available for public review. Local farmers whose families had worked the land for generations offered varied accounts. Herman Decker, whose grandfather homesteaded the property in 1892, told Mickelson that his family had always known about the gap. "My father said the trains came through when he was a boy," Decker said in a 1993 interview. "He rode them to Spokane more than once. But he also said there was a stretch where the tracks weren't quite right. He couldn't explain it better than that. Just that something about that mile felt wrong." Another farmer, Judith Onstadt, recalled her mother describing the sound of trains passing in the night. She said you could hear them coming from the northwest, clear as a bell, then they'd go quiet. Then you'd hear them again, farther away, like they'd skipped over something. When asked what the trains were skipping over, Onstadt shrugged. "Nothing. That's the problem. There's nothing there." The Milwaukee Road maintained meticulous construction records. The Pacific Extension was one of the most expensive railroad projects of its era, and the company documented every mile of grading, every bridge, every culvert. Those records were transferred to the Milwaukee Road Historical Association after the bankruptcy, and portions have been digitized and made available to researchers. The records for the Rosalia section are consistent with the rest of the line. They show surveying completed in 1906, grading begun in 1907, track laying finished in 1908, and the line opened for traffic in early 1909. Milepost markers are documented. Engineering specifications are provided. There is no indication of any gap, any deviation, any section left incomplete. And yet the physical evidence tells a different story. In 2005, a team from Washington State University's Geology Department conducted a soil analysis along the missing mile as part of an unrelated study on loess deposition in agricultural areas. Their core samples showed no disturbance in the soil profile, no compaction from heavy equipment, no imported ballast, no chemical signatures associated with railroad construction. The soil appeared to have been undisturbed for centuries. Dr. Ingrid Halverson, the lead researcher, included a brief notation in her published findings. Samples from the abandoned railroad corridor showed expected disturbance patterns. Samples from the central section showed no evidence of historical development. The discrepancy remains unexplained. She did not elaborate. When contacted by a journalist in 2008, she declined to comment. The Washington State Department of Transportation has no records explaining the gap. The Surface Transportation Board, which oversees abandoned rail corridors, lists the Milwaukee Road's Rosalia line as continuous, in its official database. Aerial photographs from the 1930s, 40s, and 50s show the corridor as a continuous line. But the resolution is too low to confirm whether tracks actually existed in the disputed section. A 2012 LiDAR survey of Whitman County, conducted for agricultural mapping purposes, revealed subtle grade elevations consistent with the abandoned railbed along most of the corridor. In the missing mile, the survey showed nothing, no elevation change, no subsurface anomalies, no trace of construction. The land there is flat, unremarkable, identical to the wheat fields surrounding it. It looks like it has looked for thousands of years. Trains ran on the Milwaukee Road through Rosalia for 70 years. Thousands of passengers traveled that route. Millions of tons of wheat were shipped along those tracks. The railroad is documented, photographed, remembered by people who rode it. But the mile that should connect two visible sections of the corridor does not exist. It has never existed. According to every physical survey conducted since 1983, the maps say the railroad was continuous. The company records say it was built. The farmers say the trains ran through. The land says otherwise. Some researchers have suggested that the missing mile represents a surveying error propagated through decades of cartographic copying, that the railroad actually followed a different route, now forgotten, and the maps simply got it wrong. But no alternative route has been identified. The terrain offers no obvious alternatives. The corridor enters the gap from the northwest and exits from the southeast in perfect alignment, as if the missing section should connect them seamlessly. Others have proposed that the tracks were removed and the grade was deliberately erased, though no one can explain why a railroad would dismantle a single mile of track while leaving the rest intact, or how they would restore the soil to its undisturbed state. The simplest explanation is that the mile was never built, that the railroad somehow operated for 7 decades with a gap in its tracks that no one noticed or recorded. The simplest explanation makes no sense. The wheat grows in the missing mile, season after season, as it does everywhere else in the Palouse. The farmers plant it, harvest it, and plant again. They do not discuss the gap unless asked. When asked, they shrug and change the subject. The trains are gone now. The tracks are gone. But the absence remains. 1.1 miles of nothing where something should have been. The land remembers what the maps forgot, or perhaps the maps remember what the land refused to hold. Every night for 9 weeks, the dead woman read names to anyone who was listening. Lamont lies in the wheat country of eastern Washington, a small unincorporated community in Whitman County, approximately 20 miles northwest of Colfax. The town was established in the 1880s as a station on the Oregon Railroad and Navigation Company line, and like many Palouse settlements, it grew around grain storage and shipping. By the 1970s, the population had dwindled to fewer than 100 permanent residents, farmers, retirees, and the families who had worked the same land for generations. The landscape around Lamont is typical of the Palouse: rolling hills covered in winter wheat, deep loess soil deposited over millennia, and horizons that stretch unbroken in every direction. The nearest town of any size is Sprague, 12 miles to the north. The nearest city is Spokane, 40 miles away. In 1974, most homes in Lamont still relied on AM radio for news, weather, and entertainment. Television reception was unreliable, and the isolation that defined life in the region made radio an essential connection to the outside world. The broadcasts began on October 7, 1974. They ended on December 21st. In between, something spoke through the radios of Lamont, something that defied explanation and left a mark on the community that has never fully faded. No official investigation was conducted. No agency took responsibility. The broadcasts were documented only in the memories of those who heard them and in the fragmentary records they left behind. What follows is a reconstruction of events based on those records. The first person to document the broadcast was Mildred Johansen, a 72-year-old widow who lived alone in a farmhouse on the eastern edge of Lamont. Her husband had died in 1968, and she had developed the habit of leaving her radio on at night for company. The radio was a Zenith tabletop model, tuned to KXLY out of Spokane, which signed off at midnight. On the morning of October 8th, Johansen mentioned to her neighbor, Arthur Gunderson, that she had heard something strange on the radio the previous night. At approximately 3:17 in the morning, the static that normally filled the airwaves after sign-off had been interrupted by a woman's voice. She was reading names, Johansen told Gunderson. Just names, one after another, with dates after each one. Like a roll call, but for people who weren't there. Gunderson, a practical man who had farmed the Palouse for 50 years, suggested that Johansen had dreamed it. She insisted she had not. The voice had been clear, she said, clearer than normal reception, with no distortion or interference. It had lasted approximately 9 minutes, then stopped. The static returned. Johansen did not write down what she heard that first night. She had no reason to. But when the broadcast repeated the following night, at exactly 3:17, with the same voice, the same cadence, the same impossible clarity, she retrieved a pencil and a notepad. Over the following weeks, she documented 17 names. Each was followed by a date. The names were unfamiliar to her. The dates ranged from 1912 to 1968. She did not recognize the voice, but something about it troubled her. It was calm, she said, patient. It sounded like someone reading from a list they had read many times before. On October 23rd, Mildred Johansen mentioned the broadcast to Eleanor Swanberg, another resident of Lamont. Swanberg had heard them, too. Within days, it became clear that the broadcasts were not limited to Johansen's radio. At least 14 Lamont residents later confirmed hearing the voice between October and December of 1974. The details were consistent. The broadcast began at 3:17 in the morning, lasted between 8 and 11 minutes, and consisted of a woman's voice reading names and dates. The voice was described as middle-aged with a slight regional accent, consistent with someone raised in the Palouse. 3 listeners, Mildred Johansen, Eleanor Swanberg, and a retired postal worker named Harold Freitag, independently documented the names they heard. When they compared notes in early December, they discovered significant overlap. 12 of the names appeared on all 3 lists. The dates matched exactly. But it was Harold Freitag who made the observation that transformed the broadcasts from a curiosity into something darker. "I know that voice," he said. According to Swanberg's later account, that's Ruth Ann Kessler. Ruth Ann Kessler had been a teacher at Lamont's one-room schoolhouse from 1941 until her death in 1961. She had taught most of the community's children during those 2 decades, and her voice was familiar to anyone who had grown up in the area. She had died of a stroke at the age of 53. Swanberg, who had been one of Kessler's students, listened more carefully the next night. By the end of the broadcast, she was certain. It was her, she told a journalist decades later. "I hadn't heard that voice in 13 years, but I knew it. That was Mrs. Kessler." Johansen, who had moved to Lamont in 1965 and never met Kessler, could not confirm the identification. But she noted that the voice sounded like a teacher, someone used to reading aloud, used to being listened to. The Federal Communications Commission has no record of any complaint or inquiry regarding unexplained broadcasts in Whitman County during 1974. The FCC's regional office in Seattle, contacted by a researcher in 2002, stated that no monitoring equipment was deployed in the Lamont area during that period and that no anomalous transmissions were logged. KXLY, the Spokane station that Johansson and others were tuned to, maintained broadcast logs from 1974. The logs confirmed that the station signed off nightly at midnight and did not resume transmission until 6 in the morning. No programming was scheduled for the 3:17 time slot. The station's chief engineer at the time, Vincent Harada, stated in a 1976 letter that the transmissions could not have originated from KXLY's equipment. "We were off the air," Harada wrote. "Our transmitter was powered down. Whatever those people heard, it didn't come from us." Independent radio operators in the region reported no unusual activity on AM frequencies during the fall of 1974. A ham radio enthusiast in Ritzville, approximately 30 miles from Lamont, monitored the AM band regularly during that period and recorded nothing anomalous. The broadcasts appeared to be localized, audible only within the immediate vicinity of Lamont itself. Radio engineers consulted about the phenomenon have proposed several theories. One involves atmospheric ducting, in which temperature inversions can cause radio signals to travel unusual distances. But ducting typically carries existing broadcasts from distant stations. It does not create new transmissions from unknown sources. Another theory involves electromagnetic interference from agricultural equipment or power lines, which can occasionally produce audio artifacts on AM frequencies. But such interference is typically random and unintelligible, not coherent speech in a recognizable human voice. A third theory proposed by a communications professor at Washington State University in 1989 suggested that the broadcasts were a hoax, a low-power transmitter hidden somewhere in Lamont, operated by someone with a recording of Ruth Ann Kessler's voice. But no transmitter was ever found, and no one in the community had access to recordings of Kessler. She had died before portable tape recorders became common in rural Washington. The names on the lists compiled by Johansson, Swanberg, and Freitag have never been fully identified. Some match individuals buried in Lamont's small cemetery. Others do not appear in any local records. Several correspond to names in census data from neighboring counties, but the connections are tenuous. No pattern has been established. The broadcast stopped on December 21, 1974. No explanation was offered. No final message distinguished that night from the 67 nights that preceded it. The voice simply did not return. Mildred Johansson continued to leave her radio on at night for several years afterward, but she never heard the broadcasts again. She died in 1982. Her notepad containing the names she documented was found among her personal effects and donated to the Whitman County Historical Society, where it remains in storage. Eleanor Swanberg spoke about the broadcasts occasionally until her death in 2004. She never wavered in her identification of the voice. "That was Ruth Ann Kessler," she said in her final interview on the subject. "I don't know how, I don't know why, but that was her voice, reading names like she used to read attendance, like she was waiting for someone to answer." Harold Freitag moved to Spokane in 1979 and did not discuss the broadcasts publicly. His list of names was lost. The one-room schoolhouse where Ruth Ann Kessler taught was demolished in 1967. The site is now an empty lot, overgrown with grass, unmarked by any memorial. Lamont today has a population of fewer than 70 people. Most of those who heard the broadcasts have died. The story persists only in fragments, a mention in a local history pamphlet, a brief reference in a 1992 newspaper article about Palouse folklore, and the fading memories of those who remain. But the names are still there, written in pencil on a yellowed notepad, in a climate-controlled archive in Colfax. Names and dates documented by a woman who did not know what she was hearing or why. Somewhere in that list, there may be an answer, or there may only be more names waiting to be read aloud. The ground at Almota cannot decide how high it is. Almota clings to a narrow shelf of land where Almota Creek empties into the Snake River, approximately 15 miles southwest of Colfax in Whitman County, Washington. The town was founded in 1877 as a steamboat landing and later became a crucial shipping point for Palouse wheat. Grain wagons descended the steep canyon roads from the surrounding hills, loaded their cargo onto riverboats, and sent the harvest downstream toward Portland and the Pacific beyond. By the 1930s, the railroads had rendered steamboat shipping obsolete. Almota's population, which had once numbered several hundred, began a slow decline. The construction of Lower Granite Dam in the 1970s permanently altered the river's character, transforming the free-flowing Snake into a series of slack-water pools. The old town site was partially flooded. What remains today is a ghost of a community, a few scattered structures, a boat launch, and the memory of a place that once mattered. The terrain around Almota is dramatic. The Snake River has carved a canyon over 1,000 feet deep through the basalt layers of the Columbia Plateau, creating a landscape of steep cliffs, narrow benches, and unstable slopes. The geology is complex. Multiple basalt flows, interbedded sediments, and active erosion processes that continue to reshape the canyon walls. It is the kind of place where precise measurement matters, for navigation, for construction, for understanding the forces that shape the land. It is also the kind of place where precise measurement has proven impossible. The United States Geological Survey established a benchmark near Almota in 1923 as part of a regional mapping effort that followed the Columbia Basin's designation as a priority area for irrigation development. The benchmark, a brass disc set into a concrete monument, was placed on stable bedrock approximately 200 yards from the river's edge at an elevation recorded as 547.3 feet above mean sea level. The benchmark was resurveyed in 1958 as part of a routine accuracy check conducted by USGS field teams. The surveyor assigned to the project, Gerald Lindbergh, recorded the elevation as 544.1 feet, a decrease of 3.2 feet from the original measurement. Lindbergh noted the discrepancy in his field report, but attributed it to possible errors in the 1923 survey. Early 20th century elevation measurements often contained inaccuracies due to limitations in equipment and technique. A 3-foot variance, while unusual, was not unprecedented. The benchmark was surveyed again in 1979, this time by a private engineering firm contracted by the Army Corps of Engineers as part of planning studies for the Lower Granite Dam project. The firm's lead surveyor, Patricia Voorhees, recorded the elevation as 549.6 feet, an increase of 5.5 feet from the 1958 measurement and 2.3 feet higher than the original 1923 figure. Voorhees flagged the discrepancy in her report. She rechecked her equipment, repeated the measurement, and obtained the same result. She requested historical survey data from the USGS and discovered the 1958 reading. The 3 surveys, conducted over 56 years, showed the benchmark at 3 different elevations, spanning a range of 5.5 feet. "I've been surveying for 18 years," Voorhees wrote in a memo to her supervisor. "I've never seen anything like this. Benchmarks don't move. That's the whole point." 2. The discrepancy attracted little attention at the time. The Army Corps of Engineers proceeded with the dam project using averaged elevation data, and Voorhees' concerns were filed without follow-up. The benchmark remained in place, undisturbed, for another 2 decades. In 2002, a Washington State University geology class visited Almota as part of a field study on Snake River Canyon geomorphology. The class instructor, Dr. Ellen Brodigan, decided to use the benchmark as a teaching exercise in surveying techniques. She brought modern GPS equipment capable of centimeter-level accuracy, technology far superior to anything available in previous decades. Her measurement recorded the benchmark at 541.8 feet above sea level. This was 2.3 feet lower than the 1958 reading, 7.8 feet lower than the 1979 reading, and 5.5 feet lower than the original 1923 survey. Dr. Brodigan repeated the measurement 3 times over 2 days, using different equipment configurations. Each reading fell within a margin of error of 0.4 feet. The GPS data was unambiguous. The benchmark was at 541.8 feet, give or take a few inches. She contacted the USGS to report the anomaly. A field representative visited the site in the summer of 2003 and conducted an independent survey using the agency's own equipment. The representative's measurement matched Dr. Brodigan's, 541.9 feet. The USGS updated its database to reflect the new elevation. No explanation was offered for the historical discrepancies. Geologists and surveyors who have examined the Almota data have proposed several theories, none of them fully satisfactory. One hypothesis involves subsidence, the gradual sinking of land due to groundwater extraction, sediment compaction, or tectonic activity. The Snake River Canyon is geologically active, and small-scale subsidence is not unusual in river valleys, but subsidence is typically a one-directional process. Land sinks, it does not rise. The 1979 measurement showed the benchmark nearly 8 feet higher than the 2002 reading. Subsidence cannot explain an increase followed by a decrease. Another theory proposes surveying error, that one or more of the historical measurements was simply wrong. But the 1979 survey was conducted by a professional engineering firm using calibrated equipment. The 2002 measurements were repeated multiple times with modern GPS technology. If errors exist, they would need to be consistent, systematic errors affecting multiple surveys conducted by different teams using different methods over different decades. A third explanation involves benchmark tampering, that someone physically moved or replaced the monument between surveys. But the brass disc and concrete base showed no signs of disturbance during any inspection. The monument's position relative to surrounding features remained consistent. There is no evidence that the benchmark itself was altered. Dr. Brodigan published a brief paper on the anomaly in 2005, presenting the data without conclusions. The Almota benchmark presents a measurement paradox, she wrote. 4 surveys conducted over 80 years using progressively more accurate equipment have returned 4 different elevations. The variance exceeds any plausible error margin. The cause remains unknown. The paper received little attention outside the surveying community. A 2008 inquiry to the USGS regarding the benchmark's status received a terse response. The current elevation is 541.9 feet. Historical data has been archived. The historical data, including Lindbergh's 1958 field notes and Voorhees's 1979 memo, is no longer available through standard USGS channels. Requests filed under the Freedom of Information Act have been returned with notations that the documents are not located in agency archives. Almota today is nearly abandoned. The boat launch sees occasional use by fishermen and recreational boaters. The old town site is overgrown, its remaining structures slowly collapsing into the landscape. The benchmark remains where it was placed in 1923, its brass disc weathered but intact. The Snake River flows past at a depth and speed determined by the dam operations downstream. The canyon walls rise steep and silent on either side. The elevation of the water, the roads, the cliffs, all of it can be measured with modern precision. All of it returns consistent, repeatable results. All of it except the benchmark. Dr. Brodigan returned to Almota in 2014 to take another measurement. Her GPS equipment recorded 542.3 feet, half a foot higher than her 2002 reading, but still well below the 1979 figure. She did not publish the new data. When asked about it by a colleague, she said only that she planned to return again in a few years. "I want to see what it does next," she said. The benchmark sits on what should be stable bedrock, in a location that should be fixed, at an elevation that should be constant. 4 surveys say otherwise. Perhaps the 5th will finally agree with one of them, or perhaps the ground at Almota will continue to move up and down, back and forth, by increments too small to see and too large to explain. The river knows what the maps do not, and the benchmark keeps its own count. "12 men disappeared in broad daylight. 3 days later, they came back, but none of them remembered leaving." Hay is a small agricultural community in Whitman County, Washington, approximately 12 miles southeast of Colfax, along the route that would eventually become State Highway 26. The town was established in 1878, named after a local settler, and grew to serve the wheat farmers who worked the surrounding hills. By 1919, Hay had a population of approximately 200, enough for a general store, a grain elevator, a church, and the infrastructure necessary to support the harvest crews that descended on the Palouse each summer. The wheat harvest in the Palouse was, and remains, a massive undertaking. Before the advent of modern combines, threshing required large crews of men working in coordinated teams, some cutting, some bundling, some feeding the steam-powered threshing machines that separated grain from chaff. These crews often traveled from farm to farm, following the harvest across the rolling hills from July through September. They were experienced, reliable, and essential to the agricultural economy. The summer of 1919 was hot and dry, ideal conditions for wheat, but punishing for the men who worked it. Temperatures regularly exceeded 90 degrees. Dust hung in the air from dawn to dusk. The work was grueling, dangerous, and relentless. On August 14, 1919, a 12-man crew arrived at the Holmgren Farm, 3 miles northeast of Hay, to begin threshing a late-season wheat crop. The crew was led by a foreman named Rolf Sigurdsson, a Norwegian immigrant who had worked Palouse harvests for over a decade. His men were a mix of locals and itinerant laborers, ranging in age from 17 to 54. They began work at 6 in the morning. By noon, they had not returned for lunch. The Holmgren family grew concerned when the threshing machine's engine continued running past the midday break. Arnie Holmgren, the farm's owner, walked out to the field to investigate. He found the machine operating unattended, its separator still turning, wheat stalks feeding into the mechanism from a pile that no one was maintaining. The crew's lunch pails sat in a row near a wagon, unopened. Canteens of water stood untouched. 12 men's worth of hats, gloves, and personal effects lay scattered around the worksite. The men themselves were gone. Holmgren shut down the machine and called for help. By late afternoon, a search party of over 30 local residents had assembled. They combed the fields, the nearby creek beds, the wooded coulees that cut through the surrounding terrain. They found no sign of the crew, no tracks leading away from the site, no indication of struggle or flight, no bodies, no blood, no explanation. The Whitman County Sheriff, Clarence Bodine, arrived the following morning. his report preserved in the county. Archives describes the scene in clinical terms. 12 adult males missing from worksite since approximately 1100 hours. August 14os, equipment operational at time of discovery. Personal effects present. No evidence of foul play, no witnesses to departure. Search ongoing. The search continued for 2 more days. Volunteers from Hay, Colfax, and the surrounding farms covered miles of terrain on foot and horseback. They dragged the creek. They checked abandoned homesteads and equipment sheds. They found nothing. On the evening of August 17th, the first man walked back into Hay. His name was Peter Lindqvist, a 23-year-old farmhand from Spokane. He was seen approaching town from the northwest, walking at a normal pace along the main road. His clothes were clean. He appeared uninjured and well-rested. When approached by townspeople, he asked what day it was. He was told it was Sunday. Lindqvist appeared confused. He believed it was Thursday, the day of the disappearance. He said he had stepped away from the threshing machine to relieve himself and was now walking back. He could not explain why he was on the road to Hay instead of in the Holmgren field. He could not account for the 3 days that had passed. Over the next 4 hours, 11 more men returned to Hay. Each arrived from a different direction. Carl Bergstrom came from the south, walking out of a wheat field near the grain elevator. Jonas Mikkelsen appeared on the eastern road, having apparently crossed several miles of open farmland. Rolf Sigurdsson, the foreman, was found sitting on the steps of the general store at dusk, unable to say how long he had been there. None of the men showed signs of exposure, dehydration, or malnutrition. Their clothes were no dirtier than they had been on the morning of August 14th. Several still had food residue from breakfast on their hands. Each man believed only hours had passed. Each man remembered stepping away from the threshing machine, to get water, to check on a horse, to stretch their legs, and then nothing. The next thing they recalled was walking toward Hay, as if they had simply resumed a journey they had never consciously begun. One man, Einar Håkansson, the oldest member of the crew, reportedly asked why everyone looked so worried. "I only stepped away to check the horses," he said. The Holmgren farm did not have horses. The threshing machine was steam-powered. Sheriff Bodine interviewed each man separately over the following week. His notes, fragmentary but preserved, reveal a consistent pattern of confusion and contradictory memories. Several men recalled seeing something in the wheat field immediately before their departure, a shimmer, a haze, something that moved against the wind. None could describe it in detail. None connected it directly to their disappearance. 2 men, Bergstrom and a laborer named William Fong, reported hearing a low hum before stepping away from the threshing machine. They described it as similar to the sound of the engine, but coming from everywhere at once, from the ground and the sky and the wheat itself. Neither man heard it when he returned. Sigurdsson, the foreman, provided the most detailed account and the most troubling. He said that when he stepped away from the machine, he had the distinct impression that he was being called, not by a voice, but by a direction. He felt pulled northeast, toward a low ridge that bordered the Holmgren property. "I didn't decide to walk," he told the sheriff. "I was already walking. By the time I realized what I was doing, I couldn't see the machine anymore, and then I couldn't see anything. And then I was sitting in town." The ridge Sigurdsson referenced is approximately half a mile from the threshing site. Search parties had covered it thoroughly during the 3-day search. They had found nothing. Medical examinations conducted by Dr. Harriet Odegaard of Colfax found no injuries, no illness, and no signs of intoxication among any of the 12 men. Their vital signs were normal. Their memories were not. Dr. Odegaard noted in her report that the men appeared unusually calm for individuals who had experienced a 3-day lapse in consciousness. "They do not seem frightened," she wrote. "They seem confused, certainly, but not afraid. It is as if they have returned from a journey they do not remember taking and are simply glad to be home." The Whitman County Sheriff's Office closed the case on September 3, 1919. The final report classified the incident as unexplained absence, no criminal activity suspected. No further investigation was conducted. No federal agencies were notified. The matter was, by all official accounts, concluded. The Holmgren farm continued operations. The wheat was eventually harvested, though Arno Holmgren hired a different crew to finish the job. He did not discuss the incident publicly. His family sold the property in 1927, and the farmhouse was demolished in 1951. The 12 men returned to their lives. Some stayed in the Palouse. Others left Washington entirely. Rolf Sigurdsson worked 3 more harvest seasons before returning to Norway in 1922. He died in Bergen in 1947 without ever providing a fuller account of what had happened. Local historians have occasionally referenced the incident in collections of Palouse folklore, though primary sources are scarce. A 1954 article in the Colfax Gazette mentioned it briefly in a retrospective on unusual local events, but provided no new information. The Palouse people, whose territory once encompassed the area around Hay, have not commented publicly on the incident. A cultural liaison from the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation asked about disappearances in the wheat country, offered only that certain places in the Palouse were known to hold time differently. She did not elaborate. The Holmgren property is now part of a larger farming operation. The field where the threshing crew vanished is planted with winter wheat each fall and harvested each summer. The ridge that Rolf Sigurdsson felt pulled toward still rises gently against the northeastern horizon. No markers indicate what happened there in August of 1919. No memorials. No plaques. Just wheat and wind and the slow turning of seasons. 12 men walked away from a threshing machine in the middle of a workday. 3 days later, they walked back. None of them knew where they had been. None of them seemed harmed. None of them ever remembered. The only detail that remained consistent across all 12 accounts was the moment of departure. Each man recalled stepping away from the machine. Each man recalled a sense of purpose, of being needed somewhere else, even if they could not say where. And one man, Einar Håkansson, asked about the horses. There were no horses on the Holmgren farm. There had not been horses there for years, but Håkansson was certain. He had stepped away to check on them. He could almost remember their names. The compasses near Colton do not lie. They simply tell a different truth, but only when the weather is warm. Colton lies in the southeastern corner of Whitman County, Washington, a small farming community of approximately 400 people situated in the rolling wheat country of the Palouse. The town was established in 1890 and named after a railroad official whose name has otherwise been forgotten by history. Like most Palouse settlements, Colton exists because of wheat, the deep loess soil, the dry summers, and the reliable harvests that have sustained the region for over a century. The terrain around Colton is typical of the Palouse. Gentle hills rising and falling in pinches, covered with winter wheat and spring barley, punctuated by occasional rock outcroppings and shallow coulees carved by ancient floods. The geology beneath the surface is Columbia River basalt, volcanic rock deposited in massive flows millions of years ago, overlain by windblown silt accumulated over millennia. There is nothing obviously unusual about the land near Colton. No visible formations suggest mineral deposits. No historical records indicate mining activity or industrial development. The area has been farmed continuously since the 1880s, producing the same crops in the same cycles as the surrounding countryside. But compasses behave differently here. They have behaved differently for as long as anyone has measured. The anomaly was first documented in 1894 by a surveyor named Ambrose Whitfield, who was establishing property boundaries for a homestead claim approximately 2 miles east of the town center. His field notes, preserved in the Whitman County Assessor's Archive, contain a brief but precise observation. Compass unreliable in northeast quarter section. Consistent easterly deviation of approximately 11 degrees. Resurveyed using solar observation. Recommend avoidance of magnetic instruments in this vicinity. Whitfield did not speculate on the cause. He simply noted the discrepancy and adjusted his methods accordingly. The anomaly might have remained a footnote in surveying history if not for a series of incidents in the mid-20th century that brought renewed attention to the site. In the summer of 1953, a group of Boy Scouts from Troop 147 in Colfax conducted an orienteering exercise in the farmland east of Colton. The troop leader, a Korean War veteran named Douglas Erickson, had designed a compass course that would take the boys through several miles of wheat fields and return them to their starting point. 6 of the 8 boys completed the course without incident. 2 14-year-old Marcus Delacroix and 13-year-old Timothy Bjornstad became disoriented approximately halfway through and wandered nearly a mile off course before being found by search volunteers 3 hours later. Both boys reported that their compasses had led them astray. Delacroix's compass, when examined afterward, appeared to function normally, but he insisted that during the exercise it had pointed consistently in the wrong direction, not randomly, but with the same steady confidence it displayed when pointing true north elsewhere. Erickson documented the incident in the troop's records and noted the location where the boys had become lost. It corresponded closely to the area Ambrose Whitfield had flagged 59 years earlier. A second incident occurred in 1971 when a private pilot named Sandra Okonkwo experienced instrument anomalies while flying a small Cessna over the Colton area. Her magnetic compass swung erratically as she crossed a specific patch of farmland, then stabilized once she had passed. She reported the incident to the Federal Aviation Administration, which logged it as localized magnetic interference and took no further action. Okonkwo, curious about the experience, returned to the area by car the following week with a handheld compass. She walked the fields until she found the zone where her compass deviated, approximately 11 degrees east of where it should have pointed. She marked the boundaries with surveyor's flags and measured the affected area at roughly 2 acres. She also noticed something the earlier accounts had not mentioned. The deviation occurred only during her daytime visit. When she returned after sunset, her compass functioned normally. The seasonal nature of the anomaly was not formally documented until 1986, when a geology student at Washington State University named Franklin Reinhold conducted a year-long study of the site as part of his master's thesis. Reinhold visited the 2-acre area weekly, taking compass readings at 12 fixed points and recording the date, time, temperature, and weather conditions. His data revealed a clear pattern. The 11-degree easterly deviation appeared reliably between mid-May and early September, then disappeared entirely during the colder months. The anomaly is not constant, Reinhold wrote in his thesis. It is seasonal. The deviation begins when average daily temperatures exceed approximately 55 degrees Fahrenheit and ceases when they fall below that threshold. The mechanism is unknown. Reinhold proposed several hypotheses. One involved thermal expansion of subsurface minerals that might alter local magnetic fields when warmed by summer heat. Another suggested that seasonal changes in soil moisture content could affect the conductivity of underlying rock formations. A third, more speculative theory proposed that biological activity, root growth, microbial processes, or decomposition might somehow generate localized magnetic effects during the growing season. None of these theories has been confirmed. Geological surveys of the area have found no unusual mineral deposits. Soil composition matches the surrounding farmland. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed no anomalous structures or voids. The Washington State Department of Natural Resources has no official classification for the site. The USGS has not conducted magnetic surveys in the immediate vicinity. The anomaly exists in the margins of official knowledge, documented by individuals, acknowledged by locals, but absent from institutional records. Residents of Colton have long been aware of the compass drift, though most discuss it only when asked directly. Helen Gustafson, whose family has farmed the land adjacent to the affected area since 1908, recalled her grandfather's warnings about the wrong field. "He told us never to trust a compass out there in summer," she said in a 2009 interview. "He didn't know why it happened. He just knew it did. We learned to navigate by landmarks instead." A local hunting guide named Raymond Sosi, who has led clients through the Palouse for over 30 years, confirmed the anomaly's reliability. "I've tested it myself many times," he said. "May through August, that spot will send you 11 degrees east of where you want to go, every time. It's more reliable than most compasses are." Sosi also described an incident from 1986 that he had never reported officially. A Boy Scout troop, different from the 1953 group, used the anomaly zone to successfully navigate to a cache they had hidden the previous summer. The boys had placed the cache using the drifted compass readings, then returned a year later and found it using the same method. "They didn't even know what they were doing," Sosi said. "They just followed their compasses both times. The drift was consistent enough that it worked. That's when I realized this wasn't random interference. It's something else, something predictable." When asked what he thought caused the drift, Sosi shook his head. "The land does what it does. I don't need to explain it. I just need to know where it happens." The 2-acre zone east of Colton remains unmarked and undesignated. It is privately owned farmland planted with wheat, like the surrounding fields. From the road, it is indistinguishable from any other patch of Palouse terrain, but compasses know the difference. Modern GPS devices function normally in the area. They rely on satellites, not magnetic fields. Hikers with digital navigation rarely notice anything unusual, but those who still carry analog compasses, who trust the simple physics of a magnetized needle seeking north, discover something unexpected between May and September. The needle drifts 11 degrees east, consistently, predictably, as if the earth beneath that small patch of farmland has its own opinion about direction and expresses it only when the weather warms. Franklin Reinhold completed his thesis in 1987 and left academia shortly afterward. He now works as a civil engineer in Seattle. He has not returned to Colton. His thesis remains in the university library, uncited and largely unread. The data is clear, the methodology sound, the conclusions uncertain. "The Colton compass drift is real," he wrote in his final paragraph. "It is measurable, repeatable, and seasonal. It should not exist according to any known geological or geophysical principle, and yet it does." The wheat grows over the anomaly each year, indifferent to the strangeness beneath. The farmers harvest it in August, when the drift is at its strongest. Their combines navigate by GPS now, by satellite signals from space. The compasses in their pockets, if they carry them at all, point 11 degrees wrong. The Earth has its own north there. It changes with the seasons, and it has never explained why.